You wake up in a white room. It's quiet. There are no windows. You don't remember how you got there. A voice comes through a speaker and tells you something strange. It says your body doesn't exist. It says your brain is in a vat, kept alive by machines. It says everything you see, hear, feel, taste, and smell comes from a computer that feeds your brain signals. The room, the bed, even your own hands, they're all part of the simulation. You try to argue, but then you pause. What if the voice is right? I'd love to invite you to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's incredible to think about how we're all connected through these stories and ideas. If you enjoy these thought-provoking explorations, consider subscribing to Tired Thinker so we can keep bringing you reflective narratives. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let your imagination drift as we delve into the mind-boggling paradoxes and mysteries. The brain in a vat thought experiment pushes us to ask hard questions. What if what you take as real is not real? What if all your experiences are part of an illusion fed directly to your brain? This idea comes from philosophers who want to explore how we know anything at all. The most basic version says, imagine your brain is taken from your skull and put in a vat. Wires connect it to a computer. The computer gives it all the same signals it would get from a body in the real world. You think you're walking, talking, eating, laughing, but you're not. You're floating in a tank, and the machine is telling your brain a story. The point isn't to scare you. It's to challenge your sense of certainty. You trust your senses because they've always worked for you. You see a chair, and you sit in it. You feel heat, and you move away. Your senses help you survive, so you believe them. But this thought experiment says, what if they lie? Let's break it down. Your brain doesn't know anything on its own. It gets electrical signals. When you see a red apple, your eye turns the light into a signal, sends it to your brain, and your brain gives you the image of a red apple. If a machine can send the same signal, your brain won't know the difference. You'll see the apple. You might reach for it. You might even taste it if the machine sends those signals too. Think about dreams. When you dream, your brain creates a whole world. You walk through it, talk to people, feel fear or joy, but none of it's real. Your body is in bed, still and quiet. Yet in your mind, it all feels real until you wake up. The brain in a vat is like a dream you never wake from. Here's another way to look at it. You're in a virtual reality headset, but you don't know it. Everything feels normal. You touch the table and it feels solid. You hear music and it sounds right. You see your reflection and it moves when you do. But it's all code, written to keep you from noticing the trick. Can you find a way to prove it's not a trick? Let's say you want to test the world. You drop a glass and it breaks. You turn on the faucet and water runs. You press a button and a light turns on. Everything behaves as expected. But that's not proof you're not in a simulation. A good simulation would include all those behaviors. It would be complete enough to fool you every time. You might try using science. Measure things, observe things, repeat the tests. But the data you collect also comes through your senses. If the machine controls those senses, then it controls your data too. Even if you think you're discovering something, the machine could be feeding you false information. You could say, but I remember my life. I remember growing up, going to school, getting a job. That seems real. But memory is part of the brain. If the machine controls your brain, it can give you any memory it wants. You might think you've lived for 30 years, but maybe you've only been in the vat for 10 minutes. Or maybe the memories never belonged to you at all. Now, think about pain. It feels so personal, so real. You touch something hot and you pull away. But pain, too, is just a signal to the brain. If the machine sends that signal, you feel it. The thing that caused the pain doesn't have to exist. Your reaction is real, but the cause might not be. The brain in a vat idea isn't about a real threat. No one has put your brain in a tank, at least not that we know of. The point is to explore how we can claim to know anything for sure. It goes back to the root of philosophy. How do you know the world is real? How do you know you're not being fooled? René Descartes, a French philosopher, had a similar idea. He wondered how we can be sure we're not being tricked by an evil demon. This demon could control all our thoughts, giving us a false world. Descartes wanted to find one thing he could be sure of. He came up with, I think, therefore I am. Even if everything else is a lie, the act of thinking proves there is a thinker. You can doubt the world, your body, your memories, but you can't doubt that you're having thoughts. But does that solve the problem? You might exist as a thinking thing, but what else can you know? Can you know anything about the world outside your thoughts? If you're just a brain in a vat, you still think, you still feel, you still want, fear, hope, but your sense of the world might be completely wrong. Some people respond to this by saying, if I can't tell the difference, then it doesn't matter. If the world feels real, acts real, and gives you real joys and struggles, then maybe that's enough. You still love people, you still laugh, you still cry. The pain and happiness feel real, even if the source is fake. But others worry. If nothing around you is real, can your relationships be real? Can love be real? Can trust or meaning or purpose exist? Or are those just more signals given to keep you calm? If your best friend is just a computer program, does that change what they mean to you? And what about free will? If a machine feeds you every input, are your choices real? Or are they reactions to things the machine decides to show you? If your life is part of a script, can you be held responsible for what you do? The brain in a vat is more than a weird sci-fi idea. It asks hard questions about knowledge, perception, and identity. It doesn't offer easy answers, but it forces us to think carefully. What can we trust? What is truth if everything we know comes through a brain that might be floating in a tank? You might go your whole life without knowing for sure. You might never find proof that your world is real. But you can keep asking the questions. That's what this thought experiment is for. It makes you question the ground beneath your feet and wonder what would happen if it vanished. Imagine sitting in a room, looking around. The walls feel solid. The chair beneath you supports your weight. You see your hands, your phone, the light from a screen. Everything feels real. But what if it isn't? What if everything you see, touch, hear, and remember exists inside a simulation, a detailed artificial reality built and run by something or someone else? The simulation hypothesis suggests this is possible. It asks us to consider whether what we call the real world is actually a computer-generated environment. Think of a video game, but scaled up. In games, characters move, speak, and react to their environment. But none of it is real. It's all code. Now imagine a game where the characters are conscious. They feel pain. They ask questions. They think they're real. How would they ever know they were in a game? This idea might sound like science fiction, but it has been taken seriously by philosophers and scientists. One well-known argument comes from philosopher Nick Bostrom. He proposed that at least one of the following three statements must be true. First, advanced civilizations will go extinct before they reach the point of creating simulations of conscious beings. Second, advanced civilizations will choose not to run such simulations. Third, we are almost certainly living in a simulation. If the first two statements are false, if future civilizations survive and choose to simulate reality, then there would likely be billions of simulated minds for every biological one. That would mean the odds of you being one of the biological ones is very low. To understand the logic, think about how computing power grows. A few decades ago, computers were slow, bulky, and limited. Now, you carry one in your pocket that's more powerful than what took humans to the moon. If that trend continues for centuries, it's easy to imagine future civilizations having the tools to simulate entire worlds. If people in the future can simulate minds with full consciousness, and if they choose to do so, they might run many of these simulations, maybe for research, maybe for entertainment, or maybe just to see how history could play out in different ways. And if that happens, most minds like ours would be simulated. That means our own experiences might be part of a simulation without us knowing it. But what would a simulated world look like? Would it be different from a real one? That's the hard part. A well-built simulation could copy all the physical rules we know: gravity, time, motion, matter, energy. It could also control our senses. If a simulated brain receives the right signals, it would see, hear, and feel just like we do. Pain would still feel like pain. Joy would still feel like joy. A memory of walking through the woods would be just as vivid. Even if none of it ever happened in what we call reality, it would still be real to the mind inside. This leads to a deeper question. How would anyone inside a simulation ever find out? If everything around you is part of the system, including your own brain, then any attempt to detect the simulation would also be part of it. It's like trying to look beyond the edges of a painting while you're still inside it. Any test you run would be subject to the rules of the simulation. Any evidence you gather would be provided by the simulation. If it's perfect, it can fool you at every step. Still, some thinkers have tried to come up with ways we might catch glitches. For example, maybe we could look for places where the simulation cuts corners. If you play a video game, you know that the game doesn't simulate the whole world at once. It only renders what you're looking at to save resources. Could the same be true in a simulation of our world? Are there parts of reality that only load when we observe them? Quantum physics gives us some strange hints. In experiments, particles behave differently when someone observes them. Some argue this might point to a system that only fills in the blanks when needed. But that idea is far from proven. Others have suggested we could find limits in the simulation's resolution. In games, you can zoom in only so far before things get blurry or blocky. Maybe space and time also have a smallest possible unit, like pixels. If the universe runs on a grid, that might be a sign of simulation. Some physicists have looked for patterns in cosmic rays that might show this kind of structure, but so far, nothing has been found. Then there's the idea of mathematical laws. Our universe seems to follow strict, elegant rules, equations that govern motion, energy, and matter. Some argue this is exactly what we would expect from a simulated world. Computers are good at math. They can follow rules. If a civilization were to simulate a world, they would likely base it on clear, consistent logic. The fact that the universe is so orderly might be a clue that it's artificial. But of course, that could also be true of a non-simulated universe. Even if we assume we're in a simulation, there's still the question of who's running it. Is it humans from the future? Some alien species? A mind unlike anything we can imagine? And why would they simulate us? It could be for science, to see how civilizations develop. It could be for art, or it could be something more troubling. Maybe they don't care about us at all. Maybe we're just side effects in a much larger system. You might wonder, if it's possible, then why haven't we seen any direct evidence? One reason could be that the simulation is designed to hide itself. If the creators want the experience to feel real, they would patch any bugs we find. They might also delete anyone who gets too close to the truth. That's a disturbing thought, but it fits the logic. If they control everything, they control what we know. Another reason we haven't found proof is that the simulation might be running at a higher level of reality than we can access. Think of characters in a video game trying to understand the code that runs their world. They don't have the tools. They're made of pixels, not code. In the same way, we might be made of simulated atoms, not whatever the real world is made of. If so, we can't reach beyond our own layer of existence. It's also possible that the idea itself is a kind of trap. A mind that starts to doubt reality might fall into endless loops of suspicion. Every memory could be false. Every friend could be part of the program. Even your own thoughts could be written by something else. If the simulation is perfect, then questioning it might never lead to answers. It might only lead to more doubt. And yet, despite all this, we go on. We eat, sleep, love, create, and suffer. Whether real or simulated, these experiences shape us. They feel meaningful. They matter to us. That might be the only truth we can hold on to. The simulation hypothesis may never be confirmed or denied. It may stay a shadow at the edge of our understanding. But asking the question forces us to think hard about what we believe, what we trust, and what it means to be real. Mary lives in a small black and white room. She has lived there her entire life. The walls are gray. The books are printed in black ink. The screens on her computer show images in shades of gray. There are no colors in her world. Everything she sees is either black, white, or something in between. Mary is not a prisoner. She is a scientist. In fact, she is an expert in the science of color vision. Her goal is to understand everything about how humans see color. She reads every textbook. She studies every journal article. She learns all the physics of light. She understands the biology of the eye. She knows about cones in the retina, how they respond to different wavelengths of light, and how signals travel from the eye to the brain. She also knows all the details of how the brain processes these signals and forms an image. After years of study, Mary knows every fact about how color vision works. She knows what light waves make something appear red. She knows what neurons fire in the brain when someone sees red. She knows how the brain connects color with memory and language. She has never seen color with her own eyes, but she understands every detail about it. She even knows how most people describe the experience of seeing red, blue, or green. Then one day, someone opens the door to her room. Outside, there are flowers. There is a blue sky and a green lawn. There is a red apple on the table. Mary walks out and sees the apple. For the first time in her life, she sees the color red. Now the question arises, did she learn something new? This is the core of the thought experiment called Mary's Room. It was first proposed by Frank Jackson in the 1980s. It is not meant to question science, but to raise questions about consciousness and experience. It asks whether knowing all the facts about something is the same as knowing what it is like to experience it. Mary had complete knowledge of the physical facts. She understood every mechanism involved in color vision, but she had never had the experience of seeing red. Seeing red gave her something new, something she could not get from books, lectures, or research papers. Let's slow this down and look at what this means. Imagine someone tells you what chocolate tastes like. They describe it in every possible way. They tell you it is sweet. They tell you it melts in your mouth. They break down the chemical makeup of cocoa. They explain how it interacts with your taste buds. They show you MRI scans of what happens in the brain when someone eats chocolate. You can listen. You can understand it all. But until you taste it yourself, you don't really know what chocolate is like. This is similar to Mary's case. The key idea is that there might be a kind of knowledge that comes only through experience. This is sometimes called qualia, a term used in philosophy to refer to the subjective part of experience. The redness of red, the taste of chocolate, the pain of a headache. These are things that seem to resist full explanation by facts alone. If this is true, then physical facts might not be enough to explain everything about the mind. Mary had all the facts, yet seeing red gave her something new. That would mean that consciousness includes more than just knowing information. It includes having experiences, and those experiences cannot be reduced to data or formulas. This leads to bigger questions. If someone has all the scientific knowledge about the mind, do they know what it's like to feel joy, or grief, or love? Can we explain consciousness using only the tools of science? Or is there something extra, something only found in the first-person point of view? Some people argue that Mary did not learn anything new. They say she gained a new ability, not new knowledge. Before, she could not recognize red when she saw it. Now she can. But they say she already had all the information. She just hadn't used it in that way. Others disagree. They say that seeing red gave her a new piece of knowledge. Not just a skill, but a fact. What red looks like. And that fact could not have been known through study alone. It had to be lived. Think again about tasting chocolate. You can gain the ability to recognize the taste. But the first moment you taste it, you also gain a new kind of insight. You learn what it is like to have that taste in your mouth. That kind of knowledge is not verbal or mathematical. It is felt. Another example, imagine someone who has been blind from birth. They have read every detail about sight. They know how light works. They understand the eye's anatomy. Then, imagine they have surgery and gain vision for the first time. When they see a tree or the face of a friend, they gain something that no book could give them. This kind of thinking challenges how we understand the mind. Science is powerful. It explains much. But this thought experiment asks whether experience itself, the raw feeling of being alive, can be captured by scientific theories. Mary's Room also pushes us to think about artificial intelligence. If we build a robot that knows everything about color but has no eyes or senses, does it know what red looks like? Could it ever? Or is something always missing if there is no experience behind the knowledge? We also confront questions about what it means to be a person. If we think of ourselves only as systems that process information, do we leave out the most important part? That part being how it feels to be us? Mary's Room does not give a clear answer. It opens a door to deeper questions. Some philosophers use it to argue for the importance of consciousness. Others use it to defend the power of science and say that Mary learned nothing new, just accessed the same knowledge in a new way. But for many people, the thought experiment reveals something intuitive and important. It shows that no matter how much we know about the world, some things must be felt to be truly understood. Mary's first moment outside the black and white room matters, not because it adds to her database, but because it gives her a direct connection to the world that no book could offer. It is a reminder that the human experience is more than the sum of its parts. It is more than neurons firing or light bouncing off surfaces. It is also the quiet, personal feeling of what it's like to see a sunset, to hear a song, to taste something sweet, or to love someone deeply. That feeling, some say, is where consciousness lives. Imagine a wooden ship. Over time, the wood begins to rot, so the crew replaces the planks, one by one. After a few years, every single part of the ship has been replaced. There is no original material left. The shape, size, and function of the ship all remain the same. It sails the same waters. The name on the side is unchanged. The crew still calls it by the same name. To them, it feels like the same ship. It works the same way. But is it? Now imagine that someone took all the original wooden pieces, the ones removed and replaced over the years, and stored them carefully. Once the replacements are done, they rebuild a second ship using only those old parts. That second ship is now made entirely of the original material. It has the same design. It looks like the original. It smells like the original. The parts carry the marks of weather and salt. So which one is the real ship? This question is known as the ship of Theseus problem. It's an old thought experiment traced back to ancient Greece. It's simple in form but deep in meaning. It raises questions about identity, persistence, and the meaning of sameness. It has been used to explore ideas in philosophy, metaphysics, and even personal identity. Think about a bicycle instead of a ship. You buy a used one, and over time you replace the pedals, the chain, the tires, the frame, and the seat. At some point, nothing remains from the original bike. If someone asks to buy your original bicycle, do you offer them the new one? Most people would say yes. You treat it as the same bicycle, even though every piece is new. This is how most people treat their cars, their computers, even their homes. But if someone took the old parts from your bicycle and rebuilt it in their garage, would you say that one is now the real bike? Some people say the identity of an object stays with the function and continuity, not the material. As long as the ship kept sailing, kept doing its job, and people kept calling it the same name, then it stayed the same ship. This view focuses on use and history. The idea is that identity sticks with the story, not the stuff. Others say the opposite. They believe that the real ship is the one made from the original parts. It has the materials that went through the storms and battles. It holds the history in its wood. If you value the physical substance over time, then you'll say the ship made from the old parts is the true one. There's also a third view. Some people say neither ship is the original. When the parts came off the first ship and the new parts went on, something was lost. The original ship no longer exists. One is a copy in function, the other a copy in material. Both are imitations of something that is now gone. This view is more strict. It says that identity depends on both matter and continuity. Break either and the thing changes. This kind of problem doesn't only apply to objects. It applies to people too. Your body changes all the time. Cells die and get replaced. Over 7 to 10 years, most of your cells are new. Your thoughts, memories, and beliefs change too. You don't think the same way you did 10 years ago. You may have new habits, new values, even a new name, but you still feel like you are you. So what makes you the same person? Suppose someone builds a machine that can scan and copy your entire brain. It makes a perfect duplicate. The copy has your memories, your emotions, your knowledge. If you disappear and the copy wakes up, claiming to be you, is it you? If the original body is still alive and meets the copy, who is the real one? This is the same kind of question as the ship of Theseus, but applied to people. You can also look at it in terms of software. Think of a game character. You start a new game, pick a character, and upgrade the armor, weapons, and skills over time. The look changes, the gear changes, the level changes. Is it the same character you picked at the start? You treat it that way because it holds your progress. The continuity makes it feel the same. In the legal world, questions like this come up with companies. If a business replaces all its employees, moves to a new building, changes its product line, but keeps the same name and registration, is it still the same company? Most courts say yes. The legal identity stays the same, but in practice, the values and culture may be different. People might say it's not the same company anymore, even if the law says it is. In medicine, organ transplants and prosthetics push this question further. If someone loses both legs and gets artificial limbs, they are still the same person. But what if someone replaces their heart, liver, eyes, skin, even parts of the brain? At what point does a person stop being the original and become something else? The Ship of Theseus thought experiment challenges our basic ideas of sameness. It makes us think about what matters more: material, function, or story. It pushes us to ask what identity really is. Is it about having the same parts? Is it about acting the same way? Is it about what others think or what you remember? There's no single right answer. Different fields answer the question in different ways. In law, continuity matters. In biology, material and function both count. In psychology, memory and personality are key. In philosophy, the answer depends on your theory of identity. But no matter how you answer, the thought experiment does its job. It forces you to think harder about what it means to say something, or someone, is the same over time. You can test this in everyday life. Think of your phone. Over the years, you upgrade the screen, change the case, replace the battery, maybe even replace the main board. Is it still the same phone? If you hand it to someone and say, "This is the phone I bought 5 years ago," are you telling the truth? Or think about an old family house. The windows get replaced, the floor gets redone, new paint, new roof, new walls, but the family still gathers there and calls it home. The memories stay, the feeling stays. Even if the house has changed, the meaning doesn't. For most people, that's what identity is, what it means to you and what it means to others. The Ship of Theseus doesn't give easy answers. That's what makes it useful. It's not meant to solve a problem. It's meant to open a door. When you walk through that door, you start noticing how many things in your life work the same way. Names, roles, relationships, and even your own self, they all have a kind of Ship of Theseus in them. You carry your past, but you're not made of the same parts. You change, and yet you stay. That's what this thought experiment is really about. You step into a teleportation booth in New York. The machine scans your entire body, atom by atom. It captures your molecular structure, your brain's neural patterns, the chemical state of your cells, and even the electrical signals coursing through your nervous system. Once the scan is complete, your body is destroyed, broken down instantly. Meanwhile, the scan data is sent to a teleportation receiver in London. There, using local materials, the receiver builds a new body. It's built exactly like the one that was destroyed. The brain structure is identical. The memories, the emotions, the physical traits, all the same. The new version of you steps out of the booth in London and walks away, thinking you've just traveled a great distance in the blink of an eye. This is the core process behind what people mean when they talk about teleportation in this context. It's not moving your atoms across space like moving a package. It's copying the arrangement of your atoms, rebuilding them in a new location, and erasing the original. That raises a serious question. What happens to you in this process? From the outside, it looks like teleportation works fine. The person who appears in London looks the same, sounds the same, and behaves the same. They remember walking into the booth in New York. They continue your life as though nothing strange happened. But from a first-person perspective, the one you're living right now, do you experience arriving in London? Or does your conscious experience end when the scanner destroys you? One way to look at it is through materialism. Materialism is the view that your mind is what your brain does. Every thought, every memory, every experience you have is the result of physical processes in your brain. If that's true, and the teleporter in London builds a brain with the exact same structure and function, then from a materialist view, there's no problem. The person in London is you. Consciousness arises from the pattern, not the specific material. But there's a second way to look at it. You might think you are more than just your structure. Maybe it matters that your body follows a continuous path through space and time. Maybe it matters that the atoms in your body are the same atoms you've always had. In that case, the process in the teleportation booth looks a lot like death. You are destroyed in New York. A copy wakes up in London, but it's not you. It's someone who thinks they're you. To explore that further, take a simple variation of the scenario. Suppose the teleportation process malfunctions. It scans you in New York, sends the data to London, and builds the new you, but it forgets to destroy the original. Now there are two versions of you, one in New York and one in London. Both versions share your memories. Both claim to be you, but they now diverge. One might go out for coffee, the other might check into a hotel. It's clear they can't both be the same person anymore. They're now separate individuals with shared origins. This makes the original process look less like travel and more like duplication. When the New York version is destroyed, only the London version remains. That looks a lot like you being killed and replaced with a copy, rather than moved from one place to another. If teleportation always involves this kind of destruction and copying, it's fair to ask whether it's a form of travel or a form of death followed by imitation. Consider how you'd react to using this machine. Say someone tells you they plan to teleport you to another city. You ask them what happens. They say, "We'll scan your body in this room. Then we'll destroy it. The data will be sent to another room where a new body will be built with all your memories and thoughts. That person will wake up thinking they're you. From their point of view, it will feel like nothing happened. Would you feel safe stepping into that machine? Or would you hesitate, thinking, what if I don't wake up on the other side? The fear isn't about whether the person in London will be fine. They will. The fear is about whether you continue to exist. There's another layer to this. Imagine doing the same process, but slowly. First, one of your brain cells is replaced with a synthetic neuron. It functions exactly the same. Then another is replaced. Then another. Eventually, every cell in your brain is replaced by synthetic parts. At no point do you lose consciousness. The process happens gradually, and you remain aware the whole time. Most people would say that you are still you at the end of the process. But now compare that to instant replacement. The teleportation booth destroys your brain and builds a new one from scratch. The result is the same brain structure, but the process skips the continuity. Would you still say the new version is you? This raises a central question about personal identity. Is continuity of consciousness what matters, or is it the pattern? If the pattern is all that matters, then teleportation works. If continuity is required, teleportation kills the original and replaces them with a replica. The philosopher Derek Parfit explored this question deeply. He argued that personal identity isn't what matters most. What matters is psychological continuity. If someone continues your memories, values, and mental processes, then your survival is not what matters. It's the survival of those patterns. In that view, worrying about whether you continue to exist might be misplaced. The person who comes out of the teleportation booth carries on your life. That's good enough. Still, this view is hard to accept on an emotional level. You might believe the science. You might agree that the person in London behaves like you and remembers everything you do, but it still feels like you would die in that booth. You'd never wake up again. Someone else would take your place thinking they were you. There's no test you can run to settle this. You can't step into the booth and watch what happens after your consciousness ends. You can't see the world through someone else's eyes. The experience of being yourself is private, and teleportation puts a sharp edge on that privacy. It forces you to ask what it means to be the same person over time. In science fiction, teleportation is often shown as clean and simple. One moment you're here, the next you're there. But underneath the convenience is a deep philosophical problem. What counts as survival? What counts as you? If you think identity is tied to your physical body, then teleportation breaks that link. If you think identity is tied to consciousness, then the question becomes whether consciousness can be transferred, or if it has to be maintained in a continuous stream. If you think identity is about memory and behavior, then the copy is enough. There's no clear answer. The teleportation paradox sits at the edge of physics, neuroscience, and philosophy. It doesn't just question the machine, it questions yourself. There is a person who looks just like you. They talk like you, walk like you, and act like you. They smile when others smile. They laugh at jokes. They say things like, "I feel tired today," or "I love this song." They go to work. They answer messages. They drink coffee and complain that it's too bitter. If you met them on the street, you'd never guess anything was wrong. They are identical to you in every observable way. But there is one key difference. They are not conscious. This is the idea of the philosophical zombie. A philosophical zombie, or P-zombie, is a thought experiment. It describes a being that behaves exactly like a human, but has no inner experience. There is nothing it is like to be this being. It has no awareness. It does not feel pain, even though it might say, "Ouch, that hurts." It does not feel joy, though it might smile when something good happens. It acts like a person because its physical structure causes it to act that way, but it has no conscious mind behind its actions. The thought experiment asks a simple question. Could such a being exist? This question is not about horror stories or science fiction. It is about the nature of consciousness. Consciousness is hard to explain in physical terms. We know the brain processes information. We know neurons fire. We know chemicals and electrical signals move through the body. But none of that tells us why it feels like something to be you. There is no obvious reason why the firing of neurons should produce the feeling of pain, or the color red, or the sound of music. This problem is sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness. It's called hard, not because it's complicated, but because it seems different from other problems in science. With most problems, we can trace cause and effect. We can observe processes and describe them in physical terms. But consciousness feels like something extra. You can describe the behavior of a brain without explaining why it produces experience. That's where the P-zombie comes in. If everything about your behavior and brain structure can be explained physically, then it seems possible that someone could behave exactly like you without being conscious. They would have the same brain structure. They would respond to questions the same way, but they would not feel anything. Their lights would be off inside. Imagine a doctor performing a pain test. They press a needle into your arm and ask how it feels. You say, "That hurts." They see you flinch. Your blood pressure rises, your pupils dilate. They record the data and move on. Now imagine they perform the same test on a P-zombie. The zombie says, "That hurts." It flinches. Its blood pressure rises, its pupils dilate. The doctor sees no difference. The zombie shows every sign of being in pain, but inside, there is no pain. It's just behavior triggered by physical processes. From the outside, both cases are the same, but from the inside, only one of them actually involves experience. This gap between what can be observed and what is felt is what makes the zombie thought experiment so powerful. It suggests that consciousness might not be something we can detect through behavior or brain scans. Some people use the zombie argument to claim that consciousness is not physical. They say that if a being can be physically identical to you but lack consciousness, then consciousness must be something extra. It must be non-physical. Maybe it comes from the soul. Maybe it comes from something outside the laws of physics. They use the zombie idea to argue against materialism, the view that everything is physical, including the mind. Other people disagree. They say that zombies are not possible. If a being really were identical to you in every way, then it would also be conscious. They argue that the zombie idea is a trick. It plays on our intuition that we can imagine consciousness being separate from behavior. But they say that this is not how the world works. If a system behaves like a conscious being, then it is conscious. There is no extra ghost inside. To test that claim, consider a robot. Suppose we build a robot that acts like a person. It learns language, it answers questions, it tells stories. It says, "I feel sad today," and explains why. It shows emotion in its voice. It reacts to new situations. People begin to treat it like a person. At what point do we say it has consciousness? Some people would say it never does. They might say it's just simulating consciousness. It's acting like it has a mind, but it doesn't actually feel anything. Others might say that if it behaves like it's conscious, then it is conscious. The line between simulation and reality becomes unclear. This brings us back to the P-zombie. If a robot can behave like a person without consciousness, and we accept that it's not really feeling anything, then the idea of a zombie becomes easier to accept. But if we say that behavior and consciousness always go together, then we have to reject the zombie idea. There's also a question about self-knowledge. How do you know that you are not a zombie? You act conscious. You say things like, "I feel tired," or "that movie made me sad." You react to pain and pleasure. But from an outside view, someone could say the same things about a zombie. So what makes you different? The answer is simple, but unsettling. You know you're conscious because you experience it. That's it. You feel things. You are aware of the world. You know what it's like to see red, or hear music, or remember your childhood. This awareness is private. No one else can see it. No test can measure it. But it's the most certain thing you know. You might doubt the world around you. You might wonder if what you see is real. But you cannot doubt that you are experiencing something. That's what makes consciousness so hard to explain. It's real, but invisible to everyone else. The zombie thought experiment pushes this point to its limit. It asks you to imagine a world where everything is the same on the outside, but something is missing on the inside. It forces you to ask whether consciousness is part of the physical world or something beyond it. You might decide that zombies are possible in theory, but not in reality. Or you might decide that even in theory, they make no sense. Either way, the idea makes you look at your own experience in a new way. It highlights how little we understand about what it means to feel, to be aware, to have a mind. And it reminds you that the most familiar part of your life, your own experience, is also the most mysterious. You and someone else both look at a ripe tomato. You say it's red. They also say it's red. You agree on what the object is. You both learn to call that color red as children. You both stop at red traffic lights and pick out ripe fruit without trouble. But here's the question. What if what you see when you look at the tomato is very different from what they see? What if your experience of red feels to them like how you experience blue? This idea is called the inverted spectrum. It suggests that two people might have their color experiences flipped, but they would never know because the labels they learned still match. One person sees the sky and experiences it as a color they call blue. The other person has that same sky trigger the experience that, for the first person, matches what they see when they look at a red apple. But because they both use the word blue for the sky and red for the apple, they both think they see the same thing. Color perception starts with light entering the eye. The light hits the retina, where it stimulates cone cells. These cones respond to different wavelengths of light. The signals from the cones travel through the optic nerve to the brain, where they are processed and turned into the experience of color. That process is physical. It happens in the same general way in most people. But the experience itself, what the color feels like to you, is not something that anyone else can see or measure. It's internal. Language doesn't help us get around that. You might tell someone that the color of a strawberry looks warm or bright, but they don't feel your experience. They only know how those words connect to their own experiences. This is the problem of qualia. Qualia are the raw, subjective parts of experience, how something feels from the inside. The feel of pain, the taste of chocolate, the sight of a deep green forest. These are all things that can't be shared directly. You can talk about them, you can point to examples, but you can't transmit the experience itself. Imagine a child learns that the sky is blue and that the grass is green. They grow up always using those words in the same way as everyone else. But suppose their brain responds to light in a way that gives them a flipped color experience. What looks blue to others looks like red to them. But they still call it blue, because that's what everyone else calls it. They pass every color test. They know that bananas are yellow and that stop signs are red. They can match paint samples and choose the right crayon. They appear completely normal. Now imagine this child swaps places with another child whose color experience matches the average. No one notices. The words still match. The behaviors still match. But the inner worlds of these two children are not the same. One sees the world in a way that would seem strange to the other if they could ever compare. There's no physical test that can detect this kind of inversion. You can measure the wavelengths of light someone responds to. You can map brain activity in response to colors. But none of that tells you what the color feels like to them. The physical processes might be identical, while the internal experiences are flipped. Try to imagine this happening with just one color. Suppose only red and green are swapped. A red apple looks green to you, but you've always called that experience red. So you call it a red apple, just like everyone else. If someone hands you a green apple, you see what others would call red, but again, you've always used green for that. Your language and behavior still match the world. But the way the world appears to you is not the same as it appears to them. You might think there would be some way to catch this. Maybe emotion could give it away. Red often feels more intense than blue. People associate red with heat, danger, or excitement. Blue feels cooler, calmer, but even these feelings could be shaped by how we learn the words. If the person who sees red when they look at blue is told that blue means calm, they might learn to associate that inner color with calmness. The emotional weight could follow the word, not the experience. You can also look at how we design things. Stop signs are red because red stands out. It draws attention. But if someone sees red as blue and blue as red, wouldn't that change how effective the sign is? Not necessarily. What matters is contrast. A color that stands out against its background will do its job, even if its inner appearance is different from person to person. As long as the label and reaction are consistent, the inner experience doesn't affect the outcome. Now take this a step further. Suppose scientists create a device that lets one person see through another's eyes. It transfers the visual data from one brain to another. The receiving person sees what the other sees. But here's the catch. Even if the shapes and movements come through, would the color experience come with them? If the first person sees a deep red sunset and the second person sees it through their own neural system, they might still experience it in their own way. The data is the same, but the experience might not be. The colors might still be inverted. The device doesn't solve the problem. It only passes the signal through the same subjective filter. Another way to explore this is through artificial intelligence. If we build a robot that sees in color, and it learns to use color labels correctly, does it have the experience of color? If it calls an apple red and the sky blue, does it feel red and blue? Most would say no. It processes information, but lacks the inner experience. That's the difference between functional behavior and conscious experience. The robot behaves like it sees color, but it doesn't have qualia. This is what makes the inverted spectrum so strange. It shows that two people can agree on everything about color, its name, its use, its cultural meaning, while possibly having completely different inner experiences. And there's no way to ever know. No one can step into another mind. No test can pull out qualia and put them on a screen. You can extend this problem beyond color. Think about sound. Maybe your experience of a violin sounds to someone else like your experience of a trumpet. But you both call it violin, and you both know how to play it. Or think about taste. Maybe chocolate tastes bitter to someone, but they've always called that taste sweet. Again, there's no mismatch in behavior, only a possible mismatch in the private experience. These mismatches don't cause problems in daily life. Language, learning, and behavior smooth over the differences, but the possibility that they exist raises a serious issue for understanding consciousness. It shows how limited our tools are when it comes to the inner world. We can scan brains, measure signals, record actions, but we can't see what someone else sees. We can't feel what they feel. The inverted spectrum thought experiment doesn't prove that qualia are inverted. It shows that we'd never know if they were. You believe you were born years ago. You have childhood memories, photos, and a long list of life events to prove it. You remember learning to ride a bike. You remember your first day of school. You might even remember what you ate for lunch a week ago. But what if none of it actually happened? What if the entire universe, including everything in it, every tree, every building, every fossil, every person, was created last Thursday? This idea is known as last Thursdayism. It claims that the universe might have come into existence just a few days ago, fully formed, with every detail in place. According to this view, all your memories were placed in your brain. All historical documents were created with fake dates. Fossils were buried in the ground. Light from distant stars was set in motion mid-flight to look like it had traveled billions of years. Everything you see and think you know was fabricated in a way that makes it appear as though the world is far older than it really is. At first, this sounds like a joke, but it raises serious questions about knowledge, evidence, and belief. If everything was created last Thursday, how would you know? You rely on memory to tell you what happened before then. You rely on science to explain natural history. You trust your senses and other people. But if those memories and pieces of evidence were fabricated, you wouldn't have any way to detect the switch. From your perspective, everything would seem normal. Think about walking through a museum. You see fossils of ancient creatures. The label says they're millions of years old. You accept that because paleontologists date them using scientific methods. But if the universe was created last Thursday, those fossils were placed there at the time of creation. The labels, the test results, even the memories of digging up the bones, those were created too. They weren't formed over time. They were installed. Now think about your own memories. You remember your last birthday. You remember your favorite teacher. These feel like real experiences built over time. But if they were created last Thursday, they're no different from lines in a novel. They're part of a script. You didn't live them. They were built into your brain as part of a fully formed character. This thought experiment doesn't claim that the world was created last Thursday specifically. The day is arbitrary. It could have been created 5 minutes ago or 5 seconds ago. The point is that no matter when the world began, if it was created in a fully formed state with all evidence of a longer history included, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. You might say, but that's not how science works. And that's true. Science relies on observable evidence and repeatable experiments. But last Thursdayism doesn't deny the evidence. It claims the evidence itself is part of the fabrication. That makes it different from scientific claims. It's not testable. You can't prove or disprove it with an experiment. Any data you use will already reflect the false history built into the world at creation. This puts last Thursdayism in the same category as other unfalsifiable ideas. An idea is unfalsifiable if no observation could prove it wrong. For example, suppose someone tells you that an invisible, undetectable dragon lives in their garage. You go look, and you don't see a dragon. They say it's invisible. You try to touch it. They say it's non-physical. You spray the area with paint. They say it repels all substances. No matter what you do, they have an explanation. The claim can't be tested, so you have no way to show it's false. Last Thursdayism works the same way. If someone says the world was created last Thursday with everything in place, and you point to your birth certificate, they respond, that was created too. If you point to a news article from last year, they say, also created. You're stuck. Every piece of evidence is part of the scenario. This idea has its roots in older philosophical arguments. One example is from 19th century philosopher Bertrand Russell. He wrote about the possibility that the world was created 5 minutes ago, with all signs of age already in place. He didn't believe this, but he used it to show how some claims fall outside the reach of evidence. You can't prove they're false, but you also can't prove they're true. They're logically possible, but unhelpful when trying to understand the world. Theological arguments also touch on this concept. Some young Earth creationists have suggested that God could have created the world with apparent age. Trees could have been created with rings. Rocks could have been created with layers. Light from stars could have been created already on its way to Earth. In this view, the universe looks old, but that's only because it was designed that way. This leads to a question about intent. If the universe was created recently with false evidence of age, was that done on purpose? If so, why? Is it a test, a trick, a mistake? And if there's no intent behind it, if it just happened, what does that say about our understanding of reality? These questions highlight why last Thursdayism feels unsettling. It suggests that everything you rely on, your memories, your senses, your trust in science, might be based on a framework that was handed to you a few days ago. You might try to escape this by appealing to probability. It seems far more likely that the universe really is old and that our memories and records are genuine. But that's only convincing if you already assume that the past existed. If someone starts with the belief that the universe was created last Thursday, then all apparent evidence of age is part of that creation. Probability doesn't help because the world was built to look old. Another angle to consider is personal identity. If your memories were installed last Thursday, does that change who you are? You feel like the same person you were a month ago, even though in this scenario, that person never existed. Does that mean you're fake? Or does your current consciousness make you real, regardless of how you came to be? There's also the question of continuity. If the universe has no past beyond last Thursday, then the story of your life is just a snapshot, a single frame in a movie that has no beginning. Your past, your relationships, your achievements, they're all part of a scene that started midway through and will continue forward. In that case, how should you act? Should you keep living your life as if nothing changed? Or does the idea that your history might be artificial affect your choices? This idea challenges your basic sense of time and cause. You think events lead to other events. You think causes happen before effects. But in last Thursdayism, the cause-effect chain is part of the illusion. Nothing caused your memories, they just exist. Nothing caused the stars to be born, they just appear that way. Some people react to this by saying the idea is useless. It doesn't change anything, so why bother thinking about it? That's fair in a practical sense, but as a thought experiment, it serves a purpose. It shows how much you rely on assumptions. It forces you to think about what counts as knowledge and how you decide what's real. It reveals the limits of proof. If you wake up tomorrow and everything feels the same, that's what you expect. You'll continue your life with the same memories, the same habits, the same beliefs. But if last Thursdayism were true, nothing about your experience would be any different. That's the trap. The idea hides itself by design. There's no evidence against it, and that's the point. It breaks reality, not by changing the rules, but by questioning whether the rules were ever real in the first place. You stand on a planet just like Earth in almost every way. The people look like us. They speak a language that sounds just like English. They have cities, oceans, weather, and science. When they get thirsty, they reach for a clear liquid that looks and tastes like water. They call it water, just like we do. But there's one difference. On this planet, the substance they call water is not H2O. It's a different chemical compound, which we can call XYZ. It behaves like water. It boils, freezes, flows, and hydrates just like water does. But it's not made of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. It has a different molecular structure. This setup comes from a thought experiment called Twin Earth. It was introduced by philosopher Hilary Putnam in the 1970s. The point is to ask what our words refer to, what they actually point to in the world. When we say water, do we mean the clear stuff we drink? Or do we mean H2O in a deeper sense, whether we know it or not? To think this through, go back in time before people knew about molecules. Imagine it's the year 1750. Chemists haven't yet discovered the structure of water. On Earth, people still use the word water to describe the stuff they drink, wash with, and see in rivers and rain. They describe it by its look, feel, and use. Now imagine people on Twin Earth doing the same thing. They use the word water for the clear liquid around them, which behaves the same way. At this point in history, there's no reason to think Earth's water and Twin Earth's water are different. Now jump to the modern day. Scientists on both planets learn about chemistry. On Earth, they find that water is H2O. On Twin Earth, they discover that their liquid is XYZ. The key question is this: when the people on Earth say water and the people on Twin Earth say water, are they referring to the same thing? Putnam's answer is no. Even though the word sounds the same and even though both substances look and act the same, the word water on Earth refers to H2O. On Twin Earth, it refers to XYZ. This suggests that what we mean by a word depends not just on how things appear or how we use the word, but also on what the thing is made of, the stuff in the world itself. To see why this matters, think about how you learned the word water. You probably saw someone point to a glass and say, "This is water." Over time, you connected that word with a set of features: clear, wet, drinkable. You didn't learn that water is H2O right away. But according to this thought experiment, even back then, you were talking about H2O, not just any clear liquid. That idea runs against the view that meaning comes only from what's in our heads. You might think that when two people have the same mental picture or the same concept, they must mean the same thing. But Twin Earth challenges that view. If two people think the same way and act the same way, but live in different environments, they might still refer to different things when they use the same word. Imagine a scientist from Earth visits Twin Earth without knowing about XYZ. She walks around, sees the oceans, drinks from a faucet, and says, "You have water here too." She means H2O, but the substance she's drinking is XYZ. She doesn't realize it yet, but she's mistaken. Her words don't match the world around her. This shows how meaning can depend on external facts, not just on what we think or believe. The same goes the other way. If a Twin Earth scientist visits Earth and says this is water, she means XYZ because that's what water has always meant on her planet. But she's now pointing to H2O. Again, her words miss the mark, even though her thoughts and intentions seem fine. This raises a deep point. Meaning isn't only in the mind, it's also in the world. This matters beyond the case of water. Take gold. You might learn that gold is a shiny, heavy metal used in jewelry. Later, you find out it's element number 79 on the periodic table. You can tell a fake ring from a real one based on that fact. If someone gives you a ring made of something that looks like gold but isn't element 79, it's not gold, it's something else. The word gold refers to a specific substance, not just an appearance. Twin Earth helps us see how this applies to other kinds of terms, especially natural kinds like water, gold, and tiger. These are things in nature that have deep structures. Our words for them don't just latch onto surface features. They hook into what those things are made of. But not all words work this way. Take chair. We don't care what a chair is made of, metal, wood, plastic. It's still a chair if it fits a certain shape and function. Or take money. A piece of paper can be money if people treat it as such. These words depend more on human use and agreement than on deep natural structure. The Twin Earth scenario shows that words can work in different ways depending on what kind of thing they refer to. This also has consequences for translation. Suppose you're trying to translate the word water from English into another language. If you're dealing with Earth's water, you'll translate it as a word that refers to H2O. But on Twin Earth, you'd need a different word for XYZ, even if it behaves the same. A perfect translation would respect the difference in substance, not just the similarity in appearance or use. Some people push back on this. They say that meaning must come from what's in our heads. If two people have the same mental content, if they think and act in the same way, then they must mean the same thing. This view sees meaning as internal, not tied to the world. But Twin Earth shows how that view can lead to confusion. If meaning is only in the head, how do we account for the difference between H2O and XYZ? The liquids are chemically distinct. Our concepts alone don't capture that. There's also a practical side to this. Imagine a medical researcher working with water. If she doesn't know whether she's dealing with H2O or XYZ, her experiments might go wrong. A treatment that works in one environment might fail in another. This shows how meaning and reference matter for real-world knowledge. Getting the substance right can have life or death consequences. The Twin Earth thought experiment highlights how language and reality interact. It suggests that to understand what we mean, we need to know not just what we think, but also what the world is like. It challenges the idea that words are only about our intentions or mental states. Instead, it points to a richer picture where meaning depends on both our minds and our surroundings. The substance behind the word matters. So when we say water, we're not just talking about what we see, we're talking about what it is. You are offered a choice. A scientist shows you a machine that can simulate any experience you want. Once connected, you will feel nothing but happiness. You can choose the kind of life you want. You can live as a famous artist, a respected leader, a loving parent, or anything else you imagine. The experiences will feel real. The emotions will match real emotions. You won't know you are in a machine. You won't remember the choice you made to enter it. As far as you're concerned, it will become your life. You will not suffer pain. You will not feel boredom, guilt, loss, or fear. The machine will make sure everything you experience brings deep satisfaction. From the inside, your life will feel meaningful, joyful, and full. But you must make the decision now. Once you enter, you can't come back out. Your real body will be placed in a life support system. Your brain will stay healthy. The machine will feed it signals to produce the life you chose. To you, it will seem like everything is happening for real. Would you plug in? The idea of the experience machine comes from philosopher Robert Nozick. He designed it to test what people value most. If happiness is the highest goal, then choosing the machine should be easy. But many people hesitate. Some refuse. That reaction reveals something important about what we think makes life worth living. If happiness is just a feeling, and the machine gives you that feeling without fail, it seems like an obvious choice. People spend their whole lives trying to feel happy. They work, build relationships, seek out entertainment, learn new things, and try to avoid suffering. The machine gives you all the good feelings with none of the effort or risk. It gives you joy without failure. It gives you love without heartbreak. It gives you success without struggle. For many people, this seems like the best outcome possible, but something feels off. When you think more about the offer, doubts start to appear. One common reaction is that the life inside the machine isn't real. The feelings are real, the memories are real, but the world they come from is fake. You didn't really paint a masterpiece or climb a mountain. You didn't really help anyone. You didn't overcome a hard problem. You only felt like you did. The machine gave you the sensations of achievement, but not the reality of it. Another concern is about relationships. The people you love in the machine are not real. They are part of the simulation. They may act like your friends, your family, your children. They may respond to you with warmth and love, but they don't exist outside your own experience. They are there only because the machine makes them appear. Some people find that empty. Real love seems to require real people who choose to love you back, not programmed responses. Others worry about agency. In the machine, you don't really choose anything. You might feel like you make decisions, but the machine ensures that everything works out. There is no real risk. There is no chance that you will fail or lose. That might seem like a good thing, but part of what makes life meaningful is the fact that outcomes are not guaranteed. If you succeed at something difficult, it means more than if you succeed at something easy. If you know the machine won't let you fail, does success still matter? There is also the question of truth. Some people care deeply about knowing the truth, even when it hurts. They want to understand the world, other people, and themselves. The machine replaces truth with illusion. You might believe you are solving big problems or changing the world, but none of it is happening. You're not seeing the real world. You're not learning anything new about how it works. You're cut off from it. Think about a specific example. Say you always wanted to be a great scientist. In the machine, you can live a life where you win awards and make big discoveries. You feel the pride, you see your name in journals, but no one actually benefits from your work. No disease is cured. No real problem is solved. From the outside, nothing has changed. The work only exists in your mind. Now think about a real scientist in the real world. They might fail many times. Their work might go unrecognized. But when they do make a discovery, it has real effects. People benefit. The world becomes slightly better. That impact gives the achievement weight. It matters not just to the scientist, but to others. For some people, this kind of impact is what gives life its worth. They want to make a difference. They want to do things that matter outside their own experience. The machine removes that possibility. It gives personal satisfaction, but disconnects it from reality. Another way to think about it is through identity. If you enter the machine, the person who wakes up inside might not be you in any strong sense. They won't know they chose to enter. They'll believe the life they live is real. You, the one making the choice now, disappear. What happens to your real self? You're not part of the world anymore. You're a body in a tank, unaware of what's going on. That can feel like a kind of death. This makes the choice harder. If you value experience above all else, the machine is appealing. If you value reality, connection, agency, and truth, the machine seems like a trap. It gives you what you want without letting you earn it. It removes the struggle that gives life meaning. It gives you a story with no substance behind it. Some people ask whether you could build a better version of the machine, one where you know it's fake but still enjoy it. That changes the scenario. If you know the world is simulated, then you face different questions. Can you still care about events that aren't real? Can simulated goals still feel satisfying? That's close to how video games work. You know the world is fake, but you still enjoy playing. You still set goals. You still feel excitement and disappointment. But the original version of the machine removes that awareness. It erases the knowledge that anything is fake. You lose the ability to compare your experience to anything outside it. Once inside, you can't tell the difference between simulation and reality. That's what makes the choice final. That's what makes the decision heavy. This thought experiment does not offer a clear answer. It asks what kind of life you want. It asks whether pleasure is enough. It asks what you care about when no one else is watching. It forces you to weigh feeling good against being real. That tension is where the thought experiment gets its power. It doesn't trick you with logic. It forces you to examine your values. It asks what matters more, how life feels or what life is. You sit in a room and look at the objects around you, a table, a window, your own hands. You believe these things exist. You believe they are real. You trust your senses to tell you about the world. You also believe certain truths about numbers, shapes, and logic. 2 + 2 = 4. A triangle has 3 sides. You believe these things without needing proof each time you think about them. They feel certain. But what if you are wrong about everything? In the 17th century, the philosopher René Descartes asked a question that pulls at the root of what it means to know anything. He imagined that an evil demon, powerful, clever, and deceptive, could be manipulating all his thoughts. This demon could create a false world that feels completely real. Every sound, every image, every touch could be part of a lie. This demon would not only trick your senses, it could also trick your reason. Even the things that seem most certain, like math or logic, could be illusions if the demon wants them to be. The idea might sound strange, but it presses a serious point. Descartes was looking for something he could know for sure. He wanted one solid truth that could not be shaken. But he realized that nearly all of his beliefs rested on trust. Trust in his senses, trust in his memory, trust in his ability to think clearly. And trust can be misplaced. Imagine you wake up in a room. You see a bed, a wall, a door. You walk out and enter a hallway. You meet people. You talk to them. They respond in ways that make sense. You look in a mirror and see your own face. All of this seems normal. But what if none of it is real? What if an outside force is generating these experiences for you? What if the hallway isn't there? What if the people don't exist? What if your memories were planted just moments ago? You would not know. The illusion would be perfect. That is the power of the demon Descartes imagined. Now take it one step further. It's not just your senses that could be tricked. Your thoughts could also be false. You believe that 1 + 1 = 2. You believe that a straight line is the shortest path between 2 points. But suppose the demon tampers with your reason. It makes you believe that false things are true. It makes you think that contradictions make sense. You might feel confident in your logic, but that confidence would mean nothing. It would be the product of manipulation. This might seem extreme, but it leads to an important insight. If you can doubt something, then it is not certain. Descartes began to doubt everything, the world outside him, the people he met, the truths of mathematics, the rules of logic. He even doubted his own body. But there was one thing he could not doubt. He could not doubt the fact that he was thinking. Even if everything else was a trick, even if he was wrong about the world, wrong about math, wrong about his own body, he still had to be there to be wrong. He had to exist to be deceived. This is where he arrived at his most famous statement. I think, therefore I am. In Latin, cogito ergo sum. Even if an evil demon exists, even if that demon tricks him every second of every day, the very act of being tricked proves that he exists. Thought requires a thinker. Deception requires someone to deceive. But that insight doesn't make the demon go away. The demon still lingers in the background. You might exist, but what kind of world do you exist in? Is it real? Is it shared with others? Or is it a private illusion crafted by something outside of you? You can't be sure. Not completely. This leads to a deep kind of skepticism. Skepticism in philosophy is the idea that knowledge is limited or uncertain. The evil demon thought experiment shows that even the most basic beliefs can be questioned. It doesn't mean they are false. It means that you can't prove them beyond all doubt. The demon gives a reason to pause. a reason to reflect on how much of what you know is built on trust. Trust in your senses, trust in your mind, trust in the rules you think the world follows. There's a modern version of the demon. Instead of a supernatural being, imagine a computer simulation. Maybe you are a brain connected to a machine. Maybe scientists in another world are running a program and you are one of the characters. Everything you see, hear, and feel is just code. Even your thoughts are part of the simulation. This is not so different from the demon. It raises the same problem. If you can't tell the difference between the illusion and the real world, what makes something real? People often say that if it feels real, that's good enough. If you enjoy life, have relationships, feel emotions, and make choices, then maybe it doesn't matter whether it's a simulation. But Descartes would not be satisfied with that answer. He wanted certainty. He wanted a foundation for knowledge that no deception could shake. He knew the senses could be fooled. He knew memory could be wrong. He even knew that logic could be bent by a clever enough trickster. So he searched for what was left when everything else had been questioned. Some critics think Descartes went too far. They argue that the idea of an evil demon is too unlikely to take seriously. But that misses the point. The demon isn't meant to be real. It's a tool. It shows how fragile your knowledge can be. It forces you to examine the roots of your beliefs. If your ideas about the world rest on shaky ground, the demon exposes the weakness. That's the value of the thought experiment. Not that a demon exists, but that your confidence in what you know may be less secure than you think. Others have tried to answer the demon in different ways. Some say that certain truths are self-evident. Others argue that shared experience makes illusion unlikely. If millions of people agree on a fact, they say it's probably real. But the demon doesn't care about numbers. It could make every person you meet say the same thing. It could give you shared memories and synchronized beliefs. The illusion could be that deep. The demon challenges more than your senses. It challenges the foundation of knowledge itself. It says, what if you are wrong about everything? What if your most basic tools for understanding the world, sight, sound, memory, logic, are unreliable? What can you trust? Descartes didn't give up. He used the demon to clear the ground, to strip away false certainty. He wanted to rebuild knowledge from the one thing he could not doubt, that he was thinking. But even then, the demon's shadow remains. It reminds you that the line between truth and illusion is thin. It reminds you that certainty is rare. And it leaves you with a question that has no easy answer. How do you know what you know? You open your eyes. Light comes in through the window. You feel your feet on the floor. The air smells like coffee or rain or the room you sleep in. You check your phone. You read a message. You think about what you need to do today. You move through the world, assuming it's real. But what if you're still asleep? This question is part of what's called the dream argument. It asks how you know you're not dreaming right now. You've had dreams before. You've been sure they were real while they were happening. Only later, when you woke up, did you realize they weren't. In some cases, the dream even continued after you thought you had already woken up. That feeling of waking up into another dream can happen more than once. If that's possible, what reason do you have to believe that this moment right now isn't part of another layer? Most dreams feel strange or unstable, but not always. You can have dreams that feel just like waking life. You can remember a past, talk to people, and make decisions. Sometimes you feel pain, sometimes you feel confused. But in other cases, everything flows in a way that seems normal. You walk through your house, you drive a car, you sit at a desk. It's not until something breaks the illusion, a sudden shift, a missing detail, a repeated pattern, that you realize something's off. And even then, the realization might not be enough to wake you up. If your dreams can copy real life with such detail, how do you tell the difference? One answer is that dreams feel less sharp, but that's not reliable. Some dreams feel clear, others feel muddy. Sometimes your waking life feels unclear too, especially when you're tired, sick, or distracted. If your test for reality is clarity, that test fails in both directions. Another idea is that dreams are disconnected from memory. In dreams, people you haven't seen in years might show up, or places might mix together. But dreams often come with false memories. In a dream, you might look at someone and feel that they've always been your friend, even if they're not someone you know. You might see a city and feel that you've lived there, even though you haven't. The dream fills in those blanks. You don't question them at the time. Only later do you notice the mistake. Your body can't help much either. In dreams, you can walk, run, eat, fight, and even fall in love. Your brain activates the same systems during REM sleep that it uses during waking movement. The only reason you don't act out your dreams is that your muscles shut down during REM. But inside your head, the experience is vivid. You're still living a full version of reality. From your own point of view, the illusion is complete. What about consistency? In the real world, things follow laws. Physics keeps things stable. Time moves forward. Objects stay where they are. But dreams can do the same. Not always, but sometimes. Some dreams follow stable rules. You move through a space that doesn't change. You return to a place and it's still there. You talk to someone, leave, and come back to find them again. The rules of gravity still apply. Even logic can hold up inside a dream. It's only when something breaks those rules, when you fly or breathe underwater or pass through a wall, that you question whether it's a dream. And even then, many dreams explain those moments away. You might think you took a drug, or you might not question it at all. Suppose you try a test, you pinch your arm, you look at a clock, you try to read a sentence. In lucid dreaming, people use these tricks to check whether they're awake. Clocks often distort in dreams, words shift, pain feels dull, but none of these tests are foolproof. You can have dreams where clocks work. You can feel sharp pain. You can read whole paragraphs. The problem is that your mind can simulate the test along with the result. If you expect the test to pass, the dream will often let it pass. You could say that the fact you're asking this question proves you're awake, but that's false. People have asked this same question while dreaming. They've wondered if the world around them was real right before a dragon showed up or the walls melted. Awareness doesn't mean wakefulness. Questioning reality doesn't prove anything. René Descartes, a philosopher from the 1600s, used this idea to doubt everything. He said that the senses can't be trusted because they sometimes fool us. If you've been tricked once, how can you ever be sure you're not being tricked again? That was the foundation of his thinking. He threw out every belief that could be doubted, even the belief that he had a body. He kept only the one thing he couldn't deny, that he was thinking. If he could doubt, then he must exist as a mind, even if nothing else was real. That's where his famous line came from, "I think, therefore I am." But even Descartes couldn't say for sure whether he was dreaming or awake. He only knew that something, somewhere, was doing the thinking. Some people use science as a line of defense. They say that if we're dreaming, we'd be able to tell because dreams don't last this long, or because we can remember yesterday in detail, or because we can follow a train of thought for hours without it collapsing. But that assumes dreams must behave a certain way. If you've ever had a dream that seemed to last for days, you know how elastic time can feel. And if your brain can simulate people, places, and pain, why not memory as well? A dream could be made to include a full history. The history doesn't have to be real, it just has to feel real. The scary part isn't just that you might be dreaming now. It's that you wouldn't know. You could go through your day, live your life, even grow old and never notice. You could be in a long, seamless dream where everything seems in order. Maybe you'll wake up, maybe you won't. Maybe you already have, again and again, into another layer each time. Lucid dreamers have reported waking up from one dream into another, then another, with each one feeling like real life. That casts doubt not just on one dream, but on the idea of waking at all. There's also no clear sign when a dream ends. Sometimes you wake up slowly, other times you snap awake with a jolt. In rare cases, you die in the dream and wake up in bed, your heart racing. So even death inside a dream doesn't feel final, it becomes just another door that blurs the lines even more. This isn't about paranoia, it's about limits. The dream argument shows how hard it is to trust experience. Your senses can't guarantee truth, your memory can be fooled, your reasoning can work inside a false frame. Every layer can feel solid until you break through it. If you're dreaming now, everything you feel, your thoughts, your plans, the sound of your own voice, could all be part of that dream. Nothing in your current experience can confirm otherwise. That makes the question not just about sleep, but about what it means to know anything at all. Zhuangzi once had a dream. In the dream, he was a butterfly. He flew through the air, light and free. He didn't know he was a man. He was just a butterfly, doing what butterflies do. Then he woke up. He found himself lying in bed. He was Zhuangzi again. But he began to wonder, was he Zhuangzi who had dreamed he was a butterfly, or was he now a butterfly dreaming he was Zhuangzi? This question is not about insects or sleep. It's about the nature of reality and identity. When you dream, the world of the dream feels real. You have a body in the dream. You have thoughts. You may even feel pain, joy, fear, or calm. While the dream lasts, you don't usually know it's a dream. The characters in the dream talk to you. You walk down streets or fly through the sky. You respond to the dream world the same way you respond to the waking world. Then you wake up. The dream fades. You realize it wasn't real. But how do you know you have really woken up? That's the question Zhuangzi raised. He asked it long before science developed brain scans or sleep studies. He asked it based only on experience. He noticed that the dream had felt as real as being awake. That led him to doubt the sharp line between waking and dreaming. He began to think the distinction might not be as strong as it seems. Now think of your own experience. You sleep at night and dream. Maybe you dream you are back in school. You sit in a classroom and take a test. You feel stress. You see people you haven't seen in years. At the time, you believe it's all happening. Then the alarm rings. You wake up in your bed. The dream world vanishes. You tell yourself it wasn't real. But what if this moment, right now, is also a dream? What if you are asleep somewhere else, and this experience is part of that dream? That's not a claim that it is a dream, just a question. How would you tell the difference? One way you might answer is to say that in dreams, things don't follow rules. You might fly. People might appear and disappear. Time jumps around. In waking life, things feel more consistent. There are physical laws. Things fall when dropped. Time moves forward in a steady way. But not all dreams are strange. Some are boring and ordinary. Some follow rules. You might dream of making coffee, checking your phone, and sitting in traffic. You only realize it was a dream after you wake up. If a dream can imitate real life well enough, then how can you trust that your current experience isn't part of one? You may say, because I woke up and left the dream behind. But that's what you say each time you wake up. What if you are waking from one dream into another, again and again? Now consider the idea of lucidity. A lucid dream is a dream in which you realize you're dreaming while the dream is still happening. In that state, you can observe the dream without fully believing it. You might even control what happens. But even in lucid dreams, the sense of I stays the same. You feel like yourself, with your own thoughts, watching the dream unfold. That points to something deeper in Zhuangzi's story. He wasn't only asking whether the world was real. He was also asking what makes him who he is. In the dream, he didn't know he was Zhuangzi. He only knew he was a butterfly. He experienced life from that point of view. If you accept that experience defines awareness, then while he dreamed, he was a butterfly. When he woke, he was Zhuangzi again. But who is the constant self that spans both states? Think of identity as a thread. When you dream, that thread bends, stretches, or even frays, but it continues. You wake, and the thread goes on. But if your sense of self changes entirely in a dream, does the thread break? If Zhuangzi in the dream had no memory of his human life, and the butterfly self had its own goals, feelings, and experiences, then maybe the thread splits. Two selves, not one. Now imagine you fall asleep and begin to dream. You dream you are someone else, someone who has a family, a home, a job. The dream lasts what feels like years. You live a full life. Then you wake up. You are shocked. That whole world disappears. The people you knew are gone. The places vanish. That version of you no longer exists. You're back in your real bed, with your real memories. What makes one of those selves real and the other not real? From a physical point of view, both experiences took place in your brain. Both were patterns of activity among neurons, but one involved your sleeping body and the other involved your waking body. Is the difference just about which body is involved? Zhuangzi's question breaks through the boundary between dream and reality. It points to the idea that both states may be more alike than they seem. In both cases, you experience a world, you take part in it, and you call yourself I. If that's true, then calling one dream and the other real may be a habit, not a certainty. There's another part of the story that adds to its weight. Zhuangzi doesn't ask whether the butterfly is dreaming of a man, because butterflies are known for dreams. He uses the butterfly because it's far from human. It flies, it follows instinct, it lives a simple life. To ask whether that creature could be dreaming of being a man flips everything. It forces you to ask what counts as a mind, what counts as experience, and whether the self is as fixed as we assume. This isn't only a question for philosophy. Some people who take strong hallucinogenic substances report becoming other beings. They feel they have turned into animals, spirits, or even non-living things. During the experience, they don't feel like they are imagining it. They feel that they are those things. Later, the feeling fades, and they return to their usual sense of self. But they often describe the experience as deeply real. So what is it that keeps us anchored to one identity? Is it memory? Is it the body? Is it language? Zhuangzi doesn't give an answer. He just presents the experience and the question. He invites you to sit with it. Some might try to escape the paradox by saying that dreams are mental and waking life is physical, but both are processed by the brain. Both rely on the senses. If the brain can simulate a world during sleep that feels just as rich as waking life, then the line between the two is not so solid. When you think about Zhuangzi's question today, with access to neuroscience, psychology, and cognitive science, the paradox still holds. You can map brain activity during sleep. You can describe REM cycles. You can find the neurons that fire during dream sequences. But none of that tells you whether your current experience is a dream. Science can describe how dreams work. It cannot prove that this isn't one. The strength of the butterfly dream is in its simplicity. It gives you a personal, vivid image of something hard to explain. It doesn't rely on complex ideas or theories. It just says, you once thought you were a butterfly. Now you think you're a man. What if you've got it backwards? And how would you ever know? A train is heading down a track. Ahead, 5 people are tied to the rails. If the train continues, it will hit and kill them. You are standing next to a lever. If you pull it, the train will switch to a side track where only one person is tied down. If you do nothing, 5 people will die. If you pull the lever, 1 person will die instead. This is the classic form of the trolley problem. It raises a question about moral responsibility. Do you act to reduce the number of deaths, or do you avoid taking action and let the outcome happen on its own? The problem forces you to make a decision based on consequences. In ethics, this is called consequentialism. The idea is that the right action is the one that leads to the best overall result. In this case, saving 5 lives seems better than saving 1. The math is simple, but the decision isn't. Now change the scenario. Instead of a lever, you are standing on a footbridge over the tracks. Next to you is a large man. The only way to stop the train is to push him off the bridge and onto the tracks. His body will stop the train, but he will die. The 5 people will live. The outcome is the same. 1 person dies, 5 are saved. But most people feel different about this version. They don't want to push someone. Pulling a lever feels like a step removed. Pushing a person feels direct and personal. This shows that people don't always judge actions based on outcomes alone. Sometimes the way you reach the outcome matters. It raises a second layer of moral thinking. Should the method matter if the result is the same? Now take the trolley problem further. Imagine you live in a world where your choices don't just affect what happens, they shape the world itself. You aren't choosing between fixed options. You are deciding which version of reality becomes real. If you pull the lever, the world shifts to one where 1 person dies. If you do nothing, it shifts to one where 5 people die. You aren't saving or killing anyone. You are choosing which version of events becomes actual. That changes the moral weight of your decision. It's no longer about doing or allowing harm. It's about defining what harm will exist at all. You become the author of reality. Your moral responsibility doesn't just lie in your actions, but in the structure of the world you bring into being. This version of the problem breaks the usual moral categories. It doesn't let you hide behind inaction. It removes the comfort of saying, "I didn't cause it." If the world only becomes real based on your decision, then not choosing is still a choice. You can't escape the moral consequences. Consider how this works in quantum physics. In one interpretation, each possible outcome of a quantum event leads to a separate branch of reality. In one branch, the cat lives. In another, it dies. If you observe the system, your observation selects a branch. Some thinkers say this selection isn't passive. It's not just that you see one version. Your active observation is what gives that version its reality. You aren't watching events unfold. You are shaping which events exist. If this is true, then the way you choose matters more than you think. Every decision makes a world. The trolley problem becomes less about moral math and more about responsibility for creation. You decide which future becomes real. You don't just weigh lives, you define them. Think about this in terms of technology. Say an artificial intelligence must solve trolley-like problems. A self-driving car has to choose between crashing into a barrier and killing its passenger or swerving and hitting a pedestrian. The programmers must decide how the car makes that choice. In doing so, they write the rules that shape the machine's view of moral reality. The car doesn't understand ethics, but it follows code written by people. In that sense, the programmers are doing what you do in the trolley problem. They define which outcomes are acceptable. They choose which versions of the world the machine will prefer. Now imagine the car could simulate millions of possible outcomes. It doesn't just pick one. It could, in theory, calculate every possible path and create an internal version of reality for each one. Then it must select which one to act on. In doing so, it must collapse the set of possibilities into a single result. That result becomes real. The process mirrors how we imagine quantum decisions shaping reality. This brings the thought experiment back to human choice. If we had perfect knowledge of every outcome, would that change how we choose, or would it overwhelm us? People often make moral decisions without full knowledge. They rely on instinct, tradition, or emotion. But if you knew the exact consequence of every action, you might feel a stronger burden. You wouldn't be guessing, you'd be choosing with full clarity. That's the pressure the trolley problem puts on you, especially when extended to shaping reality. There's another way to view the problem. What if, in choosing to pull the lever, you also change who you are? In acting to reduce harm, you alter your own moral identity. The person who pulls the lever may feel guilt, but they may also accept that as part of being responsible. The person who does nothing may feel innocent, but they may also feel complicit. In shaping outcomes, you shape yourself. This isn't abstract. In war, in medicine, in policymaking, people make decisions that affect who lives and who dies. Leaders must sometimes decide which lives to prioritize. Their choices don't just reflect outcomes, they reflect values. Do you value minimizing harm above all else? Or do you value personal responsibility, even if it leads to more harm? These aren't easy questions, and the answers shape more than numbers. They shape character. Some people argue that the trolley problem is unrealistic. Most moral decisions aren't that clear-cut. Real life is messy. But the point of the thought experiment isn't to model real situations. It's to expose the structure of moral thought. It shows the tension between intention and result. It makes you face the cost of your values. In the version where your decisions shape reality, the pressure increases. There's no hiding from your role. The 5 people and the 1 person don't exist until you choose. When you pick, you bring one into being and erase the other. It's a heavy kind of power. This model asks if ethics is about reaction or creation. If you only react to what exists, then moral thinking is about harm reduction. But if your choices define the world, then moral thinking becomes an act of authorship. You don't avoid responsibility by refusing to act. You become responsible the moment the question arises. In the end, the trolley problem isn't just about numbers. It's about what it means to decide when lives are at stake. When your decisions shape what is real, the weight of that choice doesn't go away. It becomes part of the world you chose to make. An ant walks across a beach. As it moves, it leaves a trail behind it in the sand. The ant has no purpose in mind. It walks this way and that, avoiding small pebbles, circling a leaf, moving toward a patch of shade. After several minutes, its path, by pure chance, ends up looking like a detailed sketch of Winston Churchill's face. Someone standing nearby notices the trail and is surprised. The pattern clearly resembles Churchill. But the question arises, does this trail represent Churchill? Did the ant draw Churchill? This example comes from philosopher Hilary Putnam. He used it to explore the nature of representation and meaning. At first, the question seems simple. The trail looks like Churchill, so it might seem natural to say it represents him. But when we consider how the image came to be, the question gets harder. The ant had no idea who Churchill was. It didn't intend to draw anything at all. The pattern that emerged was purely random. There was no act of reference. There was no thought behind the line. It just happened. That brings up a basic problem in philosophy of mind and language. What does it mean for something to represent something else? In human communication, we use words, images, and signs to refer to things in the world. When someone draws a picture of a person, we assume they meant to do so. Their actions are guided by a concept. The representation is intentional. But in the case of the ant, the connection between the trail and Churchill exists only in the mind of the observer. The ant did not mean anything. It was just walking. The observer sees the resemblance and reads meaning into it. That process, seeing meaning where none was intended, is a normal part of how humans interpret the world. We are pattern recognition machines. We see faces in clouds. We see animals in the shapes of rock formations. We find messages in random noise. But in those cases, we usually don't say the cloud represents a face. We say it looks like one. That's a visual resemblance, not a reference. The cloud didn't intend anything. The ant didn't intend anything. Still, the resemblance is real. So what's the difference between resemblance and representation? One way to explain it is through intention. Representation usually involves a subject trying to communicate or refer to something. A photograph represents a person because someone aimed a camera at them with the goal of capturing their likeness. A word represents an object because we agree through language that it does. A drawing of Churchill by an artist represents Churchill because the artist had that goal in mind. But in the ant case, there is no such goal. There is no communication. There is no agreement. The resemblance is an accident. If representation requires intention, then the ant's trail does not represent Churchill. It only resembles him. Still, that answer might feel incomplete. After all, if you showed someone the ant's trail without context, they might say, "That's Churchill." They would treat it as a representation, at least at first. This tension leads to deeper questions. Can representation exist without intention? Can meaning arise from accident? Is the observer's role enough to turn resemblance into reference? Suppose a different scenario. A robot is programmed to wander randomly across a surface. It has no memory. It does not process images. Its movement is determined by random number generation. One day, its path forms a perfect drawing of the Eiffel Tower. The engineers are amazed. They know the robot had no goal, no awareness. Still, the pattern looks just like the landmark. Does the robot's trail represent the Eiffel Tower? The answer depends on how we define representation. If we define it strictly as a product of intention and reference, then the robot's path, like the ant's trail, is not a representation. It only resembles the Eiffel Tower. But if we define representation more loosely, as something that causes someone else to think of the object it resembles, then perhaps it does count. The shape leads an observer to think of a specific thing. The meaning comes from interpretation, not creation. This debate touches on larger issues in how we understand language, thought, and symbols. Words don't resemble the things they represent. The word tree looks nothing like an actual tree, yet it brings the idea of a tree to mind. That's because language depends on convention. We agree that certain sounds or marks refer to certain things. But if someone invents a new word and others begin to use it, then it can take on meaning. Meaning can emerge from use. But the ant's trail doesn't follow that model. There's no system, no user, no shared rule. It's a one-time event, a pure accident. Still, the resemblance is there. So is that enough? There's also a practical side to this. In the world of machine learning, especially with image generation and pattern recognition, similar questions arise. A neural network might produce an image that resembles a real-world person. Did it intend to? The algorithm has no understanding of who that person is. It processes data. The resemblance comes from pattern matching. But does that output represent the person, or is it just a mathematical coincidence? When people view the result, they might say, "This looks like so-and-so." That's an interpretive act. The human mind adds meaning, but But does that meaning count as representation if it wasn't created with that goal? The ant drawing Churchill raises these questions in a simple way. The setup is basic. An ant walks across sand. The result is complex. The image looks like someone real. The interpretation involves a third party, an observer who sees the trail and assigns meaning to it. But if the creator, the ant, had no awareness or goal, then is the image just noise that happens to resemble something? One possible answer is that representation depends on the full context: who made the pattern, why it was made, and how it is used. In human communication, that's easy to track. In cases like the ant or the robot, the context is missing. All we have is resemblance. That makes it tempting to say it isn't enough. But then again, resemblance can be powerful. If a cave painting from thousands of years ago looked like a bison, we might assume it was meant to represent one. But what if the shape was accidental? Would we still treat it as a symbol? Would it matter whether the artist had a concept of bison? Or does our interpretation override the original cause? These are not just theoretical questions. They affect how we understand art, symbols, language, and even artificial intelligence. The ant example brings them into focus. It shows how thin the line is between accident and meaning. It challenges the idea that intention must always come first. And it asks whether meaning lives in the act of creation or the act of interpretation. A physicist sets up an experiment. In front of them is a device connected to a quantum system, like a single atom that can be in two possible states. One state will trigger a mechanism that instantly kills the person. The other state does nothing. The outcome depends on quantum randomness. According to standard quantum mechanics, before measurement, the system exists in a superposition of both states. Once measured, it collapses into one outcome. In one outcome, the person dies. In the other, they live. But in the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, things work differently. In this view, there is no collapse. Instead, the universe splits into two branches. In one branch, the person survives. In the other, they die. Both outcomes happen, but in separate worlds. From the outside, it looks like a 50-50 chance. But from the person's own point of view, they only ever experience survival. They never see the branch in which they die. They only continue in the branches where they live. This idea leads to a strange possibility. What if a person set up this experiment and kept running it over and over? Each time there's a chance of death. But in every branch where the person dies, their conscious experience ends. In the branches where they live, their experience continues. So in some branch, they always survive. From their point of view, they are still alive. This is the core of the quantum suicide thought experiment. It explores what happens to personal experience in a universe where every possible outcome happens. It asks whether, under the many worlds theory, you might be immortal, not because your body cannot be harmed, but because your conscious experience only continues along paths where you survive. The experiment takes inspiration from the famous Schrödinger's cat scenario. In that case, a cat is in a box with a quantum trigger. Before opening the box, the cat is both alive and dead. But with quantum suicide, the observer is not looking at the cat, they are the cat. The thought experiment puts the observer inside the box. The question becomes, what does the observer experience? If the many worlds interpretation is correct, then with each run of the experiment, the universe splits. There's a version of you that dies, but there's also a version that lives. That version continues to run the next trial. With enough runs, you might expect the odds to catch up with you. But in the many worlds view, the version of you that dies no longer experiences anything. Only the version that survives can reflect on what happened. Imagine this scenario in simpler terms. Suppose someone flips a quantum coin. If it lands heads, nothing happens. If it lands tails, a mechanism kills you instantly. If the coin behaves according to the many worlds view, then both outcomes occur. In one world, you're alive. In the other, you're gone. But your consciousness doesn't continue in both. It continues only where you survive. From your own point of view, it feels like heads always comes up. The implication is strange. Every time you flip the coin, the version of you that lives thinks the coin landed safely. So if you keep flipping, your consciousness always follows the version that survives. Even if the chance of survival is tiny, there's always a branch where you live. You might wake up after 100 flips thinking the machine must be broken because it never kills you. From your own view, it never could. This leads to the idea of quantum immortality. The suggestion is that your consciousness will always continue in some branch. You never experience death because there is always a version of you that doesn't die. The idea doesn't mean you become unkillable in a physical sense. It means that from your point of view, you never reach the moment of death. You only continue in the outcomes where you survive. Of course, in all the other branches, you do die. Your family and friends in those worlds see your death. They grieve. The laws of biology and physics still work. The only place where death doesn't occur for you is the branch where you survive, and that's the one you keep experiencing. To test this, you'd need to set up a real quantum-based death trigger. No one has done this. It's a thought experiment meant to explore what the many worlds theory really means for personal identity. It highlights the difference between what happens in physical space and what happens in subjective experience. This experiment also raises ethical and philosophical problems. If someone believes they cannot die because they will always survive in some branch, they might act recklessly. But the versions of them that don't survive still die. Those are still real outcomes in the multiverse. Ignoring those outcomes dismisses the cost of those deaths. Even if you never experience them, they happen. It also forces you to think about what it means to survive. Is survival simply a matter of your body remaining intact? Or does survival mean your conscious experience continues? The quantum suicide idea suggests that conscious experience is always preserved somewhere. But this turns survival into a kind of lottery. You always win, but only because you can't observe the worlds in which you lose. There are technical objections as well. Some physicists question whether consciousness really follows a path through many worlds in the way the thought experiment suggests. Others argue that the idea misunderstands what the many worlds theory actually says. It's also unclear what kind of observer survives and whether subjective continuity across branches even makes sense. Despite the objections, the thought experiment persists because it pushes the boundaries of what we think we understand about identity, death, and observation. It challenges the idea that consciousness has a clear endpoint. It suggests that from your own point of view, you may never be aware of death. It becomes something that only happens to the versions of you in branches that you no longer experience. This does not mean that pain, disease, or aging vanish. Quantum immortality doesn't promise health or happiness. It only promises that you will never experience a moment in which you no longer exist. Over time, this could mean waking up in increasingly unlikely circumstances. If most versions of you die in an accident, but one doesn't, you will continue in that one. If most versions of you age and die, but one survives each health crisis through a fluke or miracle, that's the path your awareness follows. Eventually, this leads to uncomfortable questions. If quantum immortality is true, does your life never end? Do you end up trapped in an ever-worsening state, barely surviving in some version of reality? Does that count as living? The thought experiment doesn't answer that. It only forces the question. Quantum suicide is not about encouraging danger or making predictions. It's a tool to explore how quantum theory and personal experience might intersect. It shows how theories of the universe can have strange and personal consequences. It also shows how hard it is to define what it means to be alive and what it means to be you. You're sitting still, maybe reading this on a screen. The light falls on your eyes. You feel like you're in a room or maybe outside. The thoughts in your head seem stable. You assume the past led to now. You assume that the future will continue from here. You assume the world around you exists. But what if none of that is true? There's an idea in physics called the Boltzmann Brain. It's a thought experiment. It doesn't ask whether you're dreaming or stuck in a simulation. It asks something deeper. It asks if your entire sense of the world, your body, your memories, the people around you, is the random product of particles coming together for a brief moment. You might not have a body. You might not have a past. You might just be a brain, floating in empty space, formed by chance. This idea starts with the laws of thermodynamics. In a closed system, things move toward disorder. That's entropy. Over time, heat spreads out. Systems cool. Things fall apart. but randomness still exists. In a long enough time span, even low probability events happen. If you wait long enough, molecules might line up in a certain way. They might form a temporary pocket of order. Take that further. If the universe exists for an infinite time, it's possible that atoms could randomly arrange themselves into something as complex as a functioning brain. That brain might last only a few seconds. But during those seconds, it could have electrical activity, it could produce thoughts, it could have a moment of consciousness. In that moment, the brain might believe it sees a world, it might believe it has a history, it might think it was born, grew up, and lived a normal life. But none of that would be true. It would be a flash of experience in a dead universe. This brain has no body. It's not connected to anything. It isn't the result of evolution. It's not part of a larger system. It's a fluke, a rare, spontaneous event that arises from the chaos of time and matter. And because it's not connected to anything, all of its experiences are false. They feel real, but they don't come from the outside. They come from internal signals, like a dream with no dreamer. The disturbing part is this: if the universe is big enough or lasts long enough, then it might produce more of these random brains than it produces real observers like you. Real observers, people with bodies and histories, require entire galaxies, stars, and planets. They require long chains of events. They are rare. A Boltzmann brain just needs a tiny fluctuation in a cold, dark space. If Boltzmann brains are more common than evolved beings, then it becomes more likely that you are one. After all, from your point of view, you feel like a conscious mind with memories and senses. A Boltzmann brain would feel the same. There would be no way to tell the difference. You can't step outside yourself to check. This creates a problem for science. Science depends on the idea that the world is consistent, that we can make observations, that those observations reflect something real. But if you're a Boltzmann brain, your observations come from nowhere. Your memories are fabrications. Your future doesn't exist. You'll vanish before anything can change. To ground science, you have to believe that you're not a random blip. You have to assume you're part of a system that formed over time, that your senses relate to something outside your mind. But the thought experiment makes you question that assumption. It uses the tools of physics, entropy, probability, time, to turn reason against itself. Consider a simpler analogy. Think of typing random letters on a keyboard. Most of the time, the result is nonsense. But every now and then, you might get a real word. If you keep typing forever, you'll get sentences. Then books. Eventually, by chance, you could type an exact copy of a book like this one. It's unlikely, but not impossible. Now apply that to particles. If they keep moving around forever, they might line up in a way that produces something meaningful. Most of the time, they won't. But once in a while, they will. The longer the universe exists, the more chances it gets. Given enough time, a pattern of particles might produce a brain, complete with false memories and a brief moment of awareness. This is where it gets strange. The longer the universe lasts, the more likely these false brains become. In some models of the universe, they could outnumber real observers. And if that happens, then statistically, it's more likely that you're one of them. You feel like a human being, you remember your life, you see a room or a sky or a screen, but all of that might be part of the false data firing inside a brain that formed from dust for no reason. Physicists take this problem seriously, not because they think Boltzmann brains are real, but because the idea exposes a flaw in certain cosmological models. If your model of the universe predicts more false observers than real ones, then it can't explain why we see a consistent world. It breaks the link between observation and reality. That makes it a bad model. In practice, you go on living as if your memories are real. That's what we all do. You get hungry, you feel pain, you care about your future. None of that changes because of a thought experiment. But in the background, the Boltzmann brain idea challenges your most basic assumptions. It asks you to consider that everything you know might be noise, that your sense of self might be a passing illusion, that the entire world could vanish the next moment, not because it ends, but because you never existed in the first place. Even if the idea feels extreme, it touches on something deep. We trust our minds to tell us about the world. We believe our thoughts come from somewhere real. We take memory and sensation as proof that we're alive and connected. But all of that depends on a model of the world that supports those beliefs. If the model shifts, if entropy and time suggest otherwise, then even our most solid ideas become fragile. That doesn't mean we should panic or give up, but it does mean we should ask what supports our sense of self. What makes us believe in continuity, in history, in matter? What if our mind is a momentary spark, surrounded by endless dark? What if the story we tell ourselves is only noise? A Boltzmann brain would never know it was fake. It would think it was real. It would think it had a past, even if the past never happened. It would think it had a body, even if the body didn't exist. It would try to make sense of a world that isn't there. So would you. You walk into a room and find two boxes on a table. One is transparent, and you can see that it holds $1,000 in cash. The other is opaque. You can't see inside it. You're told you can choose one of two options. You can take only the opaque box, or you can take both boxes. Before you choose, you're given an important detail. A highly reliable predictor has already made a prediction about what you will do. If the predictor guessed that you would take only the opaque box, then it placed $1 million inside it. If it predicted you would take both boxes, it left the opaque box empty. The predictor made its decision yesterday. Now it's your turn to choose. This setup is known as Newcomb's problem. It sounds like a game, but it's a philosophical thought experiment. It challenges the way we think about free will, prediction, and rational choice. The puzzle comes from a conflict between two ideas. One is based on logic and decision theory. The other is based on intuition about cause and effect. On one hand, the problem seems simple. The money is already in the boxes. What you do now can't change that. So if you take both boxes, you get whatever is in the opaque box plus the $1,000 in the clear box. If it's empty, you walk away with $1,000. If it has $1 million, you walk away with $1,000. Either way, taking both boxes gives you more money. That's what many people think when they first hear the problem. This line of thinking is called the dominance argument. No matter what's in the opaque box, taking both boxes gives you more. But that's not how the predictor works. The predictor is extremely accurate. It's not just guessing. It has a long record of being right, maybe even perfect. In every case where someone took both boxes, it predicted that and left the opaque box empty. In every case where someone took only the opaque box, it predicted that and filled it with $1 million. So when people take only the opaque box, they tend to walk away with $1 million. When they take both boxes, they tend to walk away with just $1,000. That's the evidence. That's how it works. Now you're faced with a choice. You know the predictor has already made its prediction. You know it tends to be right. If you believe that, then taking only the opaque box should lead to the best outcome. This is called the expected utility argument. You expect to get more if you choose just the opaque box. Even though you can't change the past, your decision is so closely linked to the predictor's judgment that it feels like your choice affects what's already in the box. This leads to a strange feeling. You're making a decision now, but somehow it seems tied to something that already happened. That's where the question of free will enters the picture. If the predictor really can tell what you'll choose, are you still choosing freely? Or are you just following a path that was already determined? Suppose we take the predictor seriously. It's been tested many times. People have tried to outsmart it and failed. No one has ever taken both boxes and found $1 million in the opaque one, so the pattern holds. Choosing one box seems to lead to the better payoff, even though it feels like you're giving up guaranteed money in the clear box. You can see that money, it's right there, but taking it seems to reduce your odds of getting the $1 million. This is where people start to divide. Some say the predictor is just part of the setup. It has no power over you. What's done is done. They argue that you should take both boxes and ignore the prediction. Others say that ignoring the predictor misses the point. The predictor doesn't cause the outcome, but it mirrors your decisions so perfectly that the best strategy is to behave as if your choice influences what's already happened. Think about what it means to be predicted. If someone can predict your action with perfect accuracy, then your sense of choice starts to feel thin. It feels like the outcome is already locked in. You're not choosing freely. You're acting out something that was expected. But at the same time, you don't feel forced. No one is stopping you from choosing either option. That's the tension. The predictor doesn't control you, but it knows you, and that knowledge changes the way you think about the choice. Now, take a step back and imagine the predictor is not magical. Maybe it's a supercomputer. It has access to your psychological profile, your past behavior, your heart rate, your facial expression, and more. It uses all this information to model your likely decision. If that model is accurate enough, the outcome is the same. It still predicts correctly. In that case, your behavior is being tracked so closely that it might as well be determined. This starts to blend into the debate about determinism. In a deterministic universe, every action has a cause. Your decision in the room isn't free in the sense of being random or uncaused. It's the result of your past, your biology, your thoughts, and your environment. If all of that adds up to a single inevitable choice, then a powerful enough predictor can know what you'll do. In that case, your feeling of choice might just be that, a feeling. But Newcomb's problem doesn't force you to believe in determinism. It works even if you believe in free will. What makes it strange is that your choice and the prediction are linked. The predictor made its guess yesterday. You choose today. But the results always line up. The prediction seems to follow your action, even though it comes before it. That breaks the usual order of cause and effect. There's a simpler version that brings the same problem into everyday terms. Say your friend bets on your choice. If they guess right, they win big. If they guess wrong, they lose. If they know you well, and if they guess you'll pick one box, then they bet accordingly. Your decision still matters. But now there's a social cost to going against what's expected. You start to see that being predictable doesn't mean being passive. It means your choices have patterns, and those patterns can be read. The question at the center of Newcomb's problem isn't just about money. It's about the link between prediction and decision. If someone can guess your future with high accuracy, does that mean your future is fixed? Or does it mean you are consistent? And if you're consistent, is that a kind of freedom or a kind of trap? The clearer your patterns, the better the prediction. The better the prediction, the more it feels like your actions are shaped before you make them. But even then, you still feel like you're choosing. You still pause at the table, look at the boxes and think. The opaque box sits there, its contents unknown. The clear box holds its $1,000, plain and certain. You make your move. And whatever you do, the result feels like a judgment. Not just on your logic, but on your idea of who you are. There is a library that contains every book that can possibly exist. Every combination of letters, spaces, and punctuation fills the shelves. Every volume has the same length and uses the same set of characters. The books are not written by authors, but generated by arrangement. That means every meaningful book is in there. Every novel ever written, every biography, every history, every future book, every possible version of your life. But it also means that most books are full of nonsense. Random letters, gibberish sentences, unreadable symbols, and pages that look like meaning but fall apart the moment you read them. This is the idea Jorge Luis Borges introduced in his short story, The Library of Babel. The library is infinite. The books are fixed in length and use a finite alphabet, but the combinations are so vast that the library might as well stretch on forever. For every book that says something true, there are countless others that say something false. For every accurate description of your life, there are billions that contain small errors. One might have your name spelled wrong. One might have a different ending. One might be written in reverse. Suppose you are born into this library. You live there. You grow up knowing that the truth is somewhere on the shelves. You also know that error and confusion surround it. You might find a book that tells you your birthday and the name of your parents. It might tell you what you're thinking right now. You think you found the truth. Then you find another book that says the same thing, but adds one detail that isn't right. Then another version with a completely different family, a different location, a different you. How do you know which one is real? The difficulty isn't just the size of the library. It's the problem of recognition. If you find a page that says something true, there's no special sign on it. It looks like all the others. It's just ink on paper. It doesn't glow or beep or confirm itself. In a library of this size, truth has no marker. It sits quietly among everything else, easy to miss. There is no librarian to guide you, no map to help, no index that says, here is what's worth your time. Now consider what it means to search for meaning in a place like this. You want a book that tells you something real about the world, about yourself, about what matters. But you also know that for every book like that, there are millions that tell lies. Lies that look true. Lies that feel true. Lies that mix truth and fiction so well you can't pull them apart. You might read for years and never find anything you trust. You might find a sentence that moves you, only to realize it's part of a longer passage that leads nowhere. People living in such a library might respond in different ways. Some might give up. They stop reading. They accept that meaning is buried too deep to reach. Others might pick a book at random and treat it as sacred. They follow its words and build a life around them, not because they know it's true, but because they need something to hold on to. Still others might keep searching. They develop methods to sort books, to recognize patterns, to compare texts, but they can never know for sure that they've found the right one. This story is not just about books. It's about information. It's about the world we live in. The internet, like the library, contains nearly everything. True things, false things, predictions, errors, echoes, repetitions. There's value in there, but also noise. A person might search for knowledge or insight and find opinions instead. They might look for wisdom and find slogans. The signal is buried in the static. In Borges' story, some characters believe the library must contain a catalog that explains it all. A master index, a guidebook. If they could just find that book, everything would make sense. But even if such a book exists, it would be impossible to identify. For every true index, there are endless fakes. You could never know if the one you find is the real one. You could spend your life studying a lie, thinking it's truth. This makes the act of interpretation both necessary and risky. You can't step back and see the whole library. You can only work with what you find. You decide what seems meaningful. You decide what's worth keeping. But that decision is yours alone. There's no authority in the shelves themselves. The book doesn't validate its own content. Take an example. You find a book that appears to describe your past. It names your school, your friends, the time you broke your arm. It goes on to tell you your future. You feel drawn in. You want to believe it. But how do you know it's not one of the near matches? A book with 99 truths and one quiet falsehood. A single wrong step hidden in familiarity. If you follow it and that detail is wrong, your path changes. It's not a guide, it's a trap. In another example, suppose you're looking for a scientific theory. You want to understand gravity or time. You find a book with equations. They make sense. The logic holds. You test the math. It seems right. But again, you know the library holds books with every variation of those equations. One says the speed of light is different. One says time flows backwards. One says you don't exist. How do you decide what to trust? Even more difficult is the idea that the truth, if you find it, might not matter. It might not change anything. It might sit beside all the falsehoods, powerless to stand out. The library doesn't help you act. It only gives you options. Meaning doesn't come from the shelf. It comes from what you do with what you read. This puts pressure on the reader, not just to choose, but to interpret. You become the filter. You bring your questions, your needs, your doubts. You read not as a blank slate, but as a person shaped by experience. What seems meaningful to one reader might seem empty to another. The same book might inspire or confuse, depending on who holds it. Borges doesn't offer a way out of the paradox. He doesn't tell us how to find the right book. He just shows us the scale of the challenge. In doing so, he turns the focus inward. The search for meaning becomes less about the content and more about the seeker. If you can't find the truth with certainty, how do you choose what to live by? If the library is endless, how do you decide where to stop looking? There is no trick to finding the right book. There's only the act of reading and reflecting. Each book you pick up offers a chance, a glimpse, a fragment. You test it against your memory, your logic, your sense of the world. You discard some. You hold on to others. Over time, you build a small stack of books that seem to say something true. They may not be perfect, they may not agree, but they help you move forward. In that way, the Library of Babel becomes a mirror. It reflects your desire to know. It shows the limits of certainty. It challenges you to think carefully about what you read, what you believe, and how you live in a world full of information but short on clarity. The paradox isn't just that the truth is hard to find, it's that even when you find it, you might not know. You're inside a room made entirely of glass. The walls, the floor, and even the ceiling are clear. People are outside the room, watching. You can't see them, but they can see you. You're not performing. You're just living your life. Eating, talking, thinking, resting. You're not aware you're being watched. At some point, you forget the room is transparent. You act as if no one is looking. You speak your thoughts out loud. You daydream. You stretch. You sit in silence. You don't filter yourself. You act like you would if no one else were around. Now the question becomes, are you still yourself? To answer that, you have to ask what yourself means in this context. Is it your private mind, the one that talks to itself, fidgets when nervous, zones out during a boring task? Or is it the version of you shaped by being around others, the one that watches its own behavior, hides what it feels, smiles at the right time, and adjusts its speech depending on who's listening? Most people act differently when they know they're being watched. It happens at work, at school, on camera, even in conversation. You choose your words more carefully. You sit straighter. You lower your voice or raise it depending on what you want others to think. You are still you, but you're a version of you that's edited in real time. You hold some parts back and bring others forward. You respond to how others might react. In the transparent room, that filter drops. When you forget the glass is there, the performance stops. What's left is what you do when you think no one is watching. Some people would call that the real you. Others would say that even this private version is still shaped by other people. You don't live in a vacuum. You grow up with expectations, language, culture, and habits that come from the outside world. So even when you think you're alone, you're not entirely free from influence. But something changes when you stop thinking about being observed. You make different choices. You scratch your head mid-thought. You talk to yourself under your breath. You hum a song without thinking. You drop the kind of control that comes from social awareness. This isn't randomness. It's not chaos. It's simply behavior without the extra layer of monitoring. Without the awareness of an audience, you stop performing. And what's left might reveal more about you than you expect. Think about how people act when they're home alone. Not just alone in a room, but alone in the house with the doors locked and no phone calls coming in. They move differently. They slouch more. They eat in unusual patterns. They say things they wouldn't say around anyone else. Not because they're hiding something bad, but because the pressure to present a stable image disappears. In those moments, people often feel more like themselves, even if they don't realize it. Now imagine being recorded during those moments and finding out later. You'd see yourself in a way you rarely get to. You'd notice gestures, habits, facial expressions you didn't even know you had. That might be unsettling. It might feel like watching someone else, but that person would be you. That's what the transparent room captures, a version of you that lives without immediate social input. There's another side to this. If everyone can see you and you don't know it, your life becomes a kind of ongoing broadcast. Your quirks, your slips, your reactions, all visible. From the outside, people might feel like they know you very well, but that you is unfiltered. It lacks the social polish you normally apply. They see your raw thinking. They watch your distracted moments. They learn your routines, your impulses, your inconsistencies. They know things about you that you're not aware of. That creates a gap between your self-image and your public image. You think of yourself one way, you remember only parts of your day. You have an idea of your personality. But to the watchers outside the glass, you are a person built from all the moments you don't pay attention to. You are, to them, more transparent than you are to yourself. This raises another question. Are you the person you think you are, or are you the person others see? It's tempting to say you are the private self, the version inside your head, shaped by your thoughts and memories. But that version is incomplete. You don't notice every behavior. You don't hear your tone of voice the way others do. You can't see your face when you frown or laugh. You rely on memory, which leaves gaps. Other people, in some ways, have a more consistent view of your external behavior than you do. So if the people outside the glass know more about how you act than you do, are they seeing the real you? Or is their version just as incomplete, filtered through their own assumptions and biases? The glass room doesn't answer that. It only makes the question sharper. It shows how many versions of you exist at the same time. The version you believe in, the version others observe, and the version that emerges when you stop watching yourself. The idea of being watched without knowing it connects to real-world situations: security cameras, online data, hidden microphones. People are increasingly visible in ways they don't notice. When you walk into a store, cameras follow you. When you post online, algorithms track what you say and how you say it. When you carry a phone, it logs where you go. Most of this happens in the background. You act naturally, but someone, somewhere, is collecting the pieces. That mirrors the transparent room. You forget you're visible, and you act like you're alone. But you're not. You're watched silently, and the version of you that gets seen might last longer than the one in your memory. Some people find comfort in the idea that they behave the same whether or not they're being watched. They believe their character is stable across situations. But research in psychology shows that behavior shifts depending on context. People act one way at work, another way with friends, another when they're tired, another when they're in public. That's not fake, it's flexible. Identity is not a single fixed object. It's something that adapts. So in the glass room, with no feedback, no audience cues, no reminders that you're being observed, your behavior may not reflect your true self or your false self. It might just be one version of many, and that version may be one of the few that isn't shaped by direct response to others. Whether that version is the most real or just one of many layers depends on how you define identity. If identity means continuity of memory and intention, then the version in the room is still you. If identity means presenting yourself in a social context, then that version is incomplete. But either way, it's a side of you that exists whether or not you approve of it. The transparent room doesn't create a new version of you. It just removes the layer of awareness that usually filters your behavior. What remains is not better or worse, just less edited. And in that state, the question isn't just whether you're still yourself. It's which version of you you're seeing and how many others you've never noticed. You wake up in your bed. The room looks the same as always. Light comes through the window. You hear birds outside. You reach for your phone, check the time, and start your day. Everything seems normal. Nothing feels off. You go to the kitchen, make coffee, and sit down. You trust that the world is how it appears to be. But what if this entire scene is a hallucination? More than that, what if the hallucination includes the belief that you're not hallucinating? That idea is at the heart of a concept some call meta-hallucination. It's not just a false experience. It's a false experience that convinces you it's real. In this case, the hallucination is that everything is fine. The hallucination is that nothing strange is happening at all. A hallucination is usually easy to define. It's the perception of something that isn't there. Someone might see shapes or hear voices that others don't. Those hallucinations often come with a sense that something is wrong. People may feel frightened or confused. They might question their senses or seek help. A meta-hallucination works differently. It creates a full sense of normalcy. Instead of showing you impossible things, it shows you what you expect to see. Instead of disturbing your thoughts, it matches them. You don't question it because it doesn't give you a reason to. The falsehood hides behind familiarity. This idea sounds strange, but it's not far from things we already know. People under the influence of certain drugs like powerful dissociatives or deliriants sometimes describe full scenes that feel entirely real. They don't see giant monsters or walls melting. Instead, they see their home, their friends, or their usual surroundings. Later, when the drug wears off, they realize none of it happened. But while it was happening, they didn't suspect a thing. They thought they were sober. They thought they were safe. The same can happen in dreams. You've likely had dreams where nothing unusual occurred. You were at work or walking down the street. Maybe you were talking to someone. You didn't question the situation. You didn't think, this is a dream. It felt real. Then you woke up and realized it wasn't. These examples help ground the idea. A hallucination doesn't need to be wild or chaotic. It can be calm, consistent, and boring. It can match your expectations so well that you never doubt it. That's where the danger lies. If the hallucination presents itself as reality, how would you know? This leads to a deeper question. How can you trust that you're not experiencing a meta-hallucination right now? You see your hands, your surroundings, the world in motion. You hear familiar sounds. Everything checks out. But a well-crafted hallucination would do exactly that. It would create all the signs of normal life. It would reinforce itself by giving you no reason to doubt it. Some people might argue that this is just a thought exercise, but it's more than that. The human brain builds your experience of the world. It takes signals from your senses, processes them, and produces a version of reality. That version is what you live in. You don't see the raw data. You see the brain's interpretation. This interpretation can break down. In rare cases, people with certain brain injuries or psychiatric conditions can experience persistent false realities. They may live in environments that feel real to them but don't match the external world. They're not confused for a moment. They live with those realities day after day. They don't know they're hallucinating because the hallucination feels stable and logical. Now imagine a hallucination that includes the belief that you are sane, that your thoughts are working, that your perceptions are accurate. This is not just a false image or sound. It's a complete package, a reality that defends itself. Every check you make confirms the illusion because the illusion includes the checks. Suppose you want to test whether you're hallucinating. You reach for an object and pick it up. You read the words on it. You ask someone nearby to confirm what you see. They agree with you. This seems like good evidence, but in a meta-hallucination, those confirmations are part of the construction. The object, the words, the person's agreement, none of them prove anything because they all come from the same flawed source. This sounds unsettling, but it also exposes a gap in how we think about perception. We tend to trust our senses unless something forces us not to. That works most of the time, but it's still a belief, not a certainty. If the system that builds your reality goes wrong in the right way, you won't notice. It also raises questions about what counts as real. If your experience is built from brain signals and those signals can be generated artificially, what's the difference between real and hallucinated? If the experience feels the same, behaves the same, and leads to the same memories, can you say for sure which one is true? This idea shows up in discussions of simulation theory. If a computer can simulate a conscious experience that's indistinguishable from reality, would the person in that simulation know? Would they think to question it? If their world runs without glitches, they'd have no reason to. That world would be a kind of meta-hallucination, an illusion that doesn't feel like one. The philosopher Descartes wrestled with similar ideas. He wondered how he could know anything about the world. Maybe everything was a trick. Maybe an evil demon was deceiving him. The only thing he felt sure of was that he was thinking. From that, he built his famous line, "I think, therefore I am." That idea helps in one way. You can't doubt your own thinking without thinking, but it doesn't help you confirm the world around you. The demon, or in modern terms, the brain, could still be presenting you with a perfect lie. This is what makes meta-hallucinations so difficult. It's not about being tricked in a small way. It's about being tricked in a way that closes off the possibility of knowing you were tricked. The false world locks you in by imitating the real one perfectly. It removes all signs of error. In a typical hallucination, you might feel afraid. You might notice something is off. That gives you a clue that your brain isn't interpreting things correctly. But a meta-hallucination hides those clues. It doesn't let you feel that anything is strange. You feel grounded. You feel aware. You feel in control. And because of that, you don't question anything. There's no easy way out of this thought experiment. It pushes against the limits of self-knowledge. It asks whether you can ever be sure of your surroundings or of your own mental state. It brings up uncomfortable questions about how much of your life depends on assumptions that you never had to prove. Even if the world you live in turns out to be real, the fact that this question can even be asked shows something important. Your brain gives you a version of reality, not reality itself. And in rare cases, dreams, hallucinations, simulations, it can give you a version so good that you believe it completely. The unsettling part is that you might never know the difference. Not because you're missing some clue, but because the illusion includes everything you'd use to prove it isn't one. That's what makes meta-hallucination unique. It doesn't show you something false. It hides the fact that anything is false at all. There's a book. It contains everything you will ever do. Every word you'll say, every action you'll take, every mistake, every decision, every detail of your life from birth to death. This includes what you'll eat tomorrow, what you'll dream 10 years from now, and even how you'll respond to the fact that this book exists. Nothing is left out. The book is complete, final, and cannot be wrong. You're allowed to read it. You turn the pages. You find today's date. The book says you'll make coffee, sit at your desk, and read this book. That's all true. You turn a few more pages. You see something small. Maybe it says you'll scratch your nose in 2 minutes. You wait. You feel the itch. You scratch. The book was right again. Then you get an idea. You want to prove the book wrong, so you find a simple action in the text. It says you'll pick up a red pen next, so you decide not to. You wait, do nothing, and reach for a blue pen instead. But when you look back at the book, the page doesn't say red anymore. It now says you'll pick the blue one, and that's exactly what you did. This raises the main question: can you ever act against what's written in the book? And if not, are you still free to choose what you do? You try again. You decide to really challenge the book. You think, whatever it says, I'll do the opposite. You turn to a random page. It says, you will read this line and decide to do the opposite. So you try to do the same thing instead, but now you're doing what the book said. The book wins again. No matter what you do, the text matches your choice. It seems like the book is one step ahead. This creates a strange situation. The book doesn't just predict what you'll do, it includes your reactions to reading the book. Even your rebellion is part of the prediction. You're stuck in a loop. You try to break free, but your attempts are already inside the book. That raises a deeper issue. If every action you take is already written, are you making any choices, or are you just acting out a fixed story? Some would say this is a question about free will. If the book is always right, and you can't act against it, then your choices are not really free. You're doing what the book says, not what you choose. But others would argue that the book is not forcing you to do anything. You're choosing your actions. The book just happens to know in advance what you'll choose. It's like a weather report that's always right. The report doesn't cause the rain. It just knows when the rain will happen. But the book seems more powerful than that. It doesn't just predict the future, it contains it. It holds your entire life with perfect accuracy. That suggests the future is fixed. If the future is fixed, then your feeling of choice is just that, a feeling. It seems like you have options, but there's only one path, and you're already walking it. Let's change the example. Imagine the book is locked in a safe. You can't read it, but it still exists. It still contains all your future actions. Now, you can't use the book to change anything. You live your life as usual. You make choices. You weigh pros and cons. You wonder about the outcomes. But if the book is correct, then everything you do was always going to happen that way. Even your sense of freedom was predicted. That's where the tension sits. You feel like you're choosing, but someone or something already knows the outcome. Now take it further. Suppose you can read the entire book, including your final day. You see the decisions you haven't made yet. You read about who you'll marry, where you'll live, and what job you'll take. The events haven't happened, but the book tells you they will. You try to resist, you try to pick a different career or cancel the date, but each time you find the book already knew. Your change was already in there. Even your reaction to trying to change it was part of the story. This situation feels strange because it turns time backwards. Normally, we think the past is fixed and the future is open. You can remember what you did yesterday. You can't know what will happen tomorrow. But in this case, tomorrow is already written, and you're just catching up to it. You're not shaping the future. You're reading ahead in a book that's already written. To some, this sounds like determinism. That's the idea that every event is caused by prior events, all the way back. If you had full knowledge of the starting conditions of the universe and perfect understanding of physics, you could predict everything. In that view, the book is just the logical outcome of physical laws. You're a biological system obeying those laws, and the book just lays out what must follow. But even if determinism is true, it's hard to accept emotionally. You still feel like you're choosing when you reach for the pen. You still feel like you could have done something else. The book removes that comfort. It says, this is the only way it could have gone. There's also a twist. What if the book makes a mistake? Suppose it says you'll eat cereal tomorrow, but you wake up and decide to skip breakfast. That would show the book is wrong. But if the book really is omniscient, that can't happen. If it does happen, then the book was never what it claimed to be. It wasn't perfect. It didn't truly contain your future. But if it can't be wrong, then any action you take will match the book, no matter what. Some thinkers have looked at this through the lens of self-reference. It's like a loop that refers back to itself. The book says what you will do, and what you do confirms the book. But you're also reacting to the book, which becomes part of the prediction. That loop makes it hard to find a place where you can step outside the system and make a free choice. You might also consider this scenario in reverse. Suppose the book tells you something you're afraid of. You read that you'll lose contact with a close friend. You decide to try harder, to call more often, to keep the friendship strong. But if the book is always right, then your attempt will fail, or it will become the reason the friendship ends. Maybe your sudden effort is too much or too late. The event happens because it was always going to. This creates a new kind of helplessness. Your actions matter, but only in the sense that they confirm the story. They don't change the story. That's what makes the Omniscient Diary so strange. It doesn't force you to do anything. It just tells you what you're going to do. But because it's always right, you can never do anything else. That takes away the space where choice normally lives. And yet, from your own perspective, nothing changes. You still weigh options. You still think, plan, and decide. Even if the outcome is fixed, the process still feels like choice. You still live inside that process. You don't feel like a puppet. You feel like a person. But the book watches it all from outside time. It knows how the story ends, even while you're still living the middle. You open your eyes and begin the day. You get out of bed, speak to people, scroll through your phone, respond to texts, and carry out your routine. You assume the people you talk to are conscious beings just like you. They feel emotions, they think, they have goals. But how do you know that's true? You see their actions, you hear their voices, but you never directly access their thoughts or feelings. You only observe what they do from the outside. This is the core of Solipsism, the idea that you can't be sure anyone else exists as a conscious mind. It doesn't say you're definitely the only mind. It says you have no way to prove otherwise. Everything you see and hear could be part of your imagination. The people around you could be projections. They might behave in a way that looks conscious, but they might not actually be conscious. They might not experience anything at all. Your own thoughts are clear to you. You feel pain when you stub your toe. You feel frustration when things go wrong. You can reflect on your own experience, and you know what it's like to be you, but you don't have the same access to anyone else's experience. You watch their reactions, you hear their words, but you don't feel what they feel. You can guess, but you don't know. Now think about what you really know for sure. You know your own thoughts. You know your own sensations. These are direct. No one needs to tell you they exist. If you're cold or hungry or anxious, you know it immediately. You don't need proof. You don't need to look in a mirror or ask someone else. You experience it firsthand. Everything else, including the people around you, comes from the outside. It reaches you through your senses: sight, sound, touch. You could say that you know your friend exists because they talk to you. They respond when you ask them questions. They seem to feel things. But a machine could do the same. A chatbot can simulate conversation. A robot can respond to touch or voice. These things follow programmed behavior. They seem real until you look closer and realize they are following scripts or algorithms. Now apply that idea to your world. The person who serves you coffee could be acting in a way that looks conscious, but maybe they're not. They smile, take your order, make small talk, but what if there's no mind behind the actions? What if their responses come from a system that copies human behavior without actually experiencing it? You could say it's unlikely. After all, everyone you know seems consistent. They react in believable ways. They share personal stories. They make mistakes. They remember events and express emotions. But all of this could still be simulated. The stories could be part of a script. The emotions could be imitated. You might compare this to a dream. In a dream, you interact with people. They talk, move, and respond. You believe they're real until you wake up. Then you realize your mind created them. You gave them voices and personalities without meaning to. The dream felt real at the time. Now you know it was only in your head. Solipsism asks whether your waking life could work the same way. One scenario to consider is this. Say you're the only conscious being. Everything else exists only to fill out your experience. The world adapts to your choices and movements. People appear when you need them. They say what you expect. They act according to your sense of what's normal. Their lives continue only when you observe them. When you leave the room, they stop. When you return, they resume. It sounds unlikely, but how would you know? You only ever see them when you're there to watch. This is not a question about rudeness or self-importance. It's not saying other people aren't important. It's saying you can't prove their inner lives. You can't open someone's mind and verify their consciousness. You can only see the outside. It's like watching a closed laptop. You can guess whether it's on, but you can't know until you open it. And with people, you can never open it. You can also consider the idea that the world doesn't exist when you're not observing it. This fits with solipsism too. Your senses feed you a picture of reality. But what if that picture only forms when you look? A street appears when you walk onto it. A tree sways when you look at it. But was it swaying before you arrived? You assume so, but you don't know. Philosopher George Berkeley proposed something similar. He believed that objects only exist as ideas in the mind. When no one observes them, they stop existing. In his version, everything exists in God's mind, so things keep going when you're not watching. But the basic idea remains. Observation brings the world into being. This brings up another question. If solipsism were true, would it matter? You still experience pain and joy. You still feel connection when someone comforts you. You still cry when someone leaves. Even if those people are projections, the emotions feel real. But it's also unsettling to think that your relationships might be one-sided. You love someone deeply. You trust them. You share everything with them. If they aren't conscious, what does that say about the connection? Imagine you spend years with a person, laughing, arguing, growing close. Then someone tells you they were never conscious. They responded the way a program would. They said the right words and moved the right way, but nothing was happening inside. No awareness, no feelings. You might still remember the good moments, but those memories might feel empty. You thought you were sharing your life. Now it turns out you were talking to yourself. Now flip the scenario. What if you are the one who doesn't exist? What if you are a projection in someone else's world? You think you have thoughts and feelings, but what if you're a background character? This flips solipsism around. You're not the only conscious being. You're not conscious at all. There's no way to answer these questions with certainty. No scientific test proves someone else's consciousness. No machine reads minds in that way. All we have is behavior. You can only infer someone is conscious because they act the way you do. They cry when hurt. They hesitate when anxious. They smile when they see someone they love. You recognize these responses because you know what they feel like inside you. You assume the same connection exists in them. But that's all it is, an assumption. This doesn't mean you stop trusting people. It doesn't mean you avoid relationships, but it does reveal how much of your experience relies on things you can't verify. You trust your senses. You trust memory. You trust that the people around you have minds of their own. Solipsism shows how fragile that trust is. You build your sense of reality on things you feel, not things you can prove. And you do it every day, without thinking twice. The universe contains conditions that seem just right for life. If some of these conditions had been even slightly different, complex life might not exist. For example, if the strength of gravity were a bit stronger or weaker, stars might not form the way they do. If the balance between matter and antimatter were off, galaxies wouldn't have formed. If carbon couldn't form inside stars, life as we know it would not be possible. These facts are not speculative. They come from physics and cosmology. Scientists call this idea fine-tuning. This fine-tuning leads to a big question. Why is the universe set up in a way that allows life to exist at all? It seems unlikely. The range of values for things like the gravitational constant, the mass of an electron, or the strength of the strong nuclear force is narrow. Change any one of them slightly, and the universe becomes sterile. No stars, no chemistry, no biology, no observers. One answer that some thinkers propose is the anthropic principle. This principle says that you can only observe a universe where conditions allow observers to exist. In other words, if the universe weren't the kind that supports life, you wouldn't be around to wonder about it. That much seems obvious, but it leads to a deeper thought. Maybe there's no need to explain why the universe is right for life. You're here, so it must be. This is where the idea of the Anthropic Shadow comes in. It suggests that your very presence filters what kind of universe you can observe. Out of all possible universes, you'll only ever find yourself in one that allows your existence. That casts a shadow over the full range of possibilities. You can't see the full set of all universes. You can only see the narrow slice where beings like you are possible. So when you look around and say, wow, it's strange that the universe is so well suited to life, you may just be looking through a lens shaped by your own existence. To make this clearer, imagine you're fishing in a lake. You catch a fish, and it's at least 6 inches long. You do this a few more times, and every fish you catch is at least that big. You might begin to think, this lake has no small fish. But then you look at your fishing net and realize it only lets through fish smaller than 6 inches. You never had a chance to catch smaller ones. The design of your net filters what you can observe. In the same way, your existence filters what kind of universe you can see. Apply this to cosmology. Suppose there are many possible universes, billions, trillions, maybe even an infinite number. Some have different laws of physics. Some have different constants. Most are sterile. They collapse quickly, or expand too fast, or never form atoms. But a tiny subset, perhaps just a few, have the right conditions for galaxies, stars, planets, and life. You, as a thinking being, can only exist in one of those few. So of course you find yourself in a universe that supports life. Any other kind of universe would be unobservable by you. This doesn't explain how the universe came to be this way. It doesn't explain why the constants are what they are, but it does say that the fact that you're here to notice it creates a kind of bias. You will always observe a universe that allows your own existence. That observation can't tell you anything about the wider set of universes, if such a set exists. It also can't tell you whether this universe is special, designed, or random. The Anthropic Shadow creates a kind of blind spot. When you try to draw conclusions about how typical your universe is, you run into a problem. You have no access to the full picture. You can only observe from within the one version of reality that supports your kind of observation. This limits what you can infer. Think of it like walking into a room with no windows. You find a bowl of fruit on a table. The fruit is fresh. You wonder, why is the fruit always fresh in this room? But maybe the answer is simple. You only walk into the room on days when the fruit is fresh. You never see the room when the fruit is spoiled because you're not there then. Your presence creates a selection effect. You think you're learning about the room, but you're really just learning about the conditions that allow you to be in the room in the first place. Back in physics, this selection effect shows up when people ask why the universe seems to be balanced on a knife's edge. A common argument is that this is evidence of some deeper design. Maybe from natural laws we don't yet understand, or maybe from something else. But the Anthropic Shadow suggests another possibility. Maybe you're just seeing the result of a filter you can't step outside of. You exist in a universe that allows you. That's the only kind of universe you can ever observe. Some scientists and philosophers are uncomfortable with this line of thinking. It feels like giving up on the idea of explanation. They prefer models that can be tested, measured, and repeated. The Anthropic Shadow doesn't offer a new theory. It doesn't predict anything. It just cautions you about what kind of data you're actually looking at. The effect becomes more striking when you consider catastrophic events. Suppose there are many types of cosmic disasters: gamma ray bursts, vacuum decay, sudden shifts in physical laws. If these events happened often, intelligent life might never have a chance to evolve. Or if it did evolve, it might be wiped out before it could look around. But since you're here, it's likely you live in a universe, or a part of a universe, where those disasters either don't happen or happen at a low rate. You don't see how common they really are. You're living in a survivorship bubble. You only observe outcomes that allow observers. There's also a statistical twist to this. If intelligent life is rare, and it only appears in a narrow set of conditions, then any intelligent observer will always find those narrow conditions in place. It won't matter if 99.999% of the universe's possible versions are dead or unstable. You're not in those versions. You're in the tiny fraction that works. From your perspective, it seems fine-tuned. But from a bigger view, it may be that observers always find themselves surprised by how well their universe supports them, because that's the only kind of universe where they can appear. This raises a question of how much confidence you can place in your own observations. Can you trust that the universe is what it seems? Or is your point of view shaped so strongly by selection effects that you can't draw broad conclusions? You can still study physics, build models, and test predictions. But when you ask the deeper questions, why this universe, why these laws, you have to keep the Anthropic Shadow in mind. Your ability to ask those questions already tells you something about the universe you're in. It tells you that at the very least, it had to allow you to ask. It doesn't mean the universe exists because of you. That would flip the reasoning backward. But your presence does limit what kind of data you can collect. You can't see from a position outside the filter. You can only see through it. That makes it harder to know whether the fine-tuning you see is unusual, expected, or even meaningful. The Anthropic Shadow doesn't solve the mystery. It just changes the shape of the question. You live in a world filled with consistent rules. Gravity pulls things down. Light travels in straight lines. Computers process data, and people make choices. When you drop a cup, it falls and breaks. When you speak, others hear your voice. Everything around you follows patterns you've come to trust. Now you hear an idea. This world might be a simulation. It might be running on a computer far beyond anything you can imagine. That computer, or simulator, exists in another world, what people sometimes call the base reality. In that place, beings created this simulated world. They programmed its laws and let it run. At first, that idea sounds strange, but it doesn't seem impossible. Computers exist. Simulations exist. We create them all the time. Video games, virtual environments, even models of entire ecosystems. If technology keeps advancing, a future civilization might have the power to simulate entire worlds like ours. Then another question follows. What if the beings who built this simulator aren't in base reality either? What if their world is a simulation too? The thought keeps going. If their simulator was created by someone else, and that simulator by someone else again, then there's no end. The chain continues forever. Every world runs inside a computer built in another world. No one lives in base reality because there's no bottom layer. Reality is an infinite stack of simulations. This is the infinite regress of simulations. It's not just an abstract idea. It comes from a serious question in philosophy and computer science. If simulations become common and most conscious beings live inside them, what are the chances you're in the one world that's real? To look at this, consider how simulations work. In our world, we create games where characters walk, talk, and react to their surroundings. Those characters aren't conscious, not yet, but the gap is closing. Some researchers believe we could create artificial minds one day. If that happens, a simulated world could contain beings who think, feel, and question their existence, just like you do. Now imagine a world advanced enough to build such simulations. They wouldn't build just one. They might run thousands or millions. Each simulation might have many generations of conscious beings. Those beings might reach the same level of technology and start running their own simulations. This creates a cascade. Each level of the simulation contains its own universe. Some simulations might be aware they're simulated. Others might have no idea. Each layer believes it's at the top or close to it, but none can know for sure. This leads to a strange outcome. If most beings live in simulations, then it's more likely that you do too. The base reality might contain only one civilization, But that civilization could create billions of simulated civilizations. Statistically, it becomes less likely that you're in the one real world and more likely you're in one of the simulations. If that's true, then there's no reason to stop at just one layer. If your world is a simulation and you build a simulation inside it, then the world inside that simulation is 2 layers deep. Keep going and the chain gets longer. If this can happen once, it can happen many times. There's no clear stopping point. At this point, it's natural to ask whether this chain can go on forever. That's where the idea of infinite regress comes in. Infinite regress means there is no first cause, no original simulator. Every layer depends on a previous one, and there's no foundation at the bottom. The simulations never reach bedrock, there's always another layer below. But that idea comes with problems. Computers take resources. They need memory, power, and space. Simulations, especially detailed ones, use a lot of those resources. Each new layer would add more strain. If one simulation runs another, it splits its resources. The next layer gets even less. Eventually, the simulation might not have enough power or detail to keep working. At some point, it could collapse. That leads some to think the chain must end. Maybe it only goes 5 layers deep, maybe 10, but not forever. Still, others argue that simulation doesn't need to be perfect. Maybe each layer doesn't need to simulate the entire universe, just the parts people observe. If no one looks at the stars, they don't need to be rendered. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's there, the simulator doesn't bother with sound. This selective rendering saves resources. With tricks like this, maybe the chain could go on longer. But even if it's long, it still faces a core problem. If no simulator is in base reality, then nothing is real. Every world depends on another. Every rule, every particle, every moment of time is borrowed from a deeper system. Without a true origin, nothing has a firm base. This is hard to picture. In daily life, you expect things to rest on something solid. Chairs sit on floors, floors rest on foundations, foundations touch the earth. But in this case, there's no earth, just more floors. If the chain never ends, then reality becomes an illusion made from illusions. Each world pretends to be real, but each one is only a copy of the one before. This kind of regress appears in other areas too. In theology, people ask who created God. If God made the universe, who made God? If someone made God, who made them? The same happens in physics. If the universe began with a big bang, what came before? If time started then, what caused time to begin? In each case, people want an answer. They want a bottom layer, but the answer may never come. Infinite regress isn't satisfying, but it may be the only option. In the case of simulations, one response is to say that base reality must exist. Somewhere, there has to be a world that is not simulated. That world started the chain. Every simulation comes from it, even if they don't know it. This would give reality a root, but there's no way to find it from inside. If you live in a simulation, you can't see the machine running it. You can't access the world above. You only see what the simulator lets you see. That makes it impossible to prove whether you're in a simulation or not. And if that's true, then every layer has the same problem. Each one thinks it might be real, each one might be wrong. They can never be sure. So you go through your day, you drink coffee, you send messages, you think your thoughts, and all the while, you might be running in a simulation, or a simulation of a simulation, or 10 layers deep. You can't tell. No one can. There might be beings above you watching, or maybe not. Maybe your world is a solo run. Maybe it's one of billions. Maybe you'll build your own simulations and start the chain again. Either way, the question remains open. If every simulator is simulated, what does it mean for the world you live in now? And how many layers deep are you already? You believe things. You believe the sun will rise tomorrow. You believe the earth is round. You believe that 2 + 2 = 4. When someone asks why you believe these things, you probably have an answer. Maybe you point to science, logic, or direct experience. But if you keep asking why, the answers start to get shaky. The philosopher Agrippa noticed this problem almost 2,000 years ago. He saw that every belief must fall into one of 3 categories. Either it relies on circular reasoning, it rests on an assumption that can't be proven, or it leads to an infinite regress of justifications. This is called the trilemma. You say something is true, then someone asks why. You give a reason, then they ask why that reason is true. You give another reason, and so on. The chain of justification has to end somewhere. But wherever it ends, the ending is a problem. You can't give reasons forever, because no one can remember or explain an infinite number of steps. If the chain loops back on itself, it's circular. That means your belief relies on itself to prove itself. If you stop at an assumption that you can't prove, then the belief rests on faith. So the question becomes, can we really know anything for sure? Imagine a child asking questions. A parent says, "The stove is hot." The child asks, "Why?" The parent says, "Because I turned it on." The child asks again, "Why does turning it on make it hot?" The parent says, "Because electricity flows through the coil and creates heat." The child keeps going, "Why does electricity do that?" This could go on for a long time, but eventually the answers stop. The parent may say, "That's just how it works." That's the assumption part of the trilemma. At some point, the chain of explanation ends not with proof, but with a stopping point. Now apply this to something more abstract, like mathematics. Take the statement that 1 + 1 = 2. That seems obvious. But if you ask why it's true, you move into definitions and logic. You might say that it's part of the rules of arithmetic. Then you ask why those rules are true. You dig into formal logic and set theory. Eventually, you find yourself working with axioms, statements that are assumed to be true without proof. In math, axioms are chosen for their usefulness and consistency, not because they're proven. This is the assumption problem again. At the bottom of even the most rigorous system, you find unproven statements. You might try to escape the trilemma by appealing to direct experience. You say you know the grass is green because you see it. That seems simple. But someone can ask, why do you trust your senses? You might say, because they've worked in the past. But that's circular. You're trusting your senses to prove that your senses are trustworthy. The same problem shows up in science. Science relies on observation, but also on the assumption that nature behaves in consistent ways. We can't prove that the laws of physics won't change tomorrow. We assume they won't because they haven't changed before. That's reasoning based on habit or induction. It's not airtight. Some people try to solve the trilemma with foundationalism. That means they accept that certain beliefs are basic. These basic beliefs don't need proof. They act as the foundation for everything else. For example, "I think, therefore I am" is often seen as a foundational belief. Descartes used it to rebuild knowledge from the ground up. He started by doubting everything, but he noticed that even in doubt, he was thinking. And if he was thinking, he had to exist. So he took that as his base. From there, he tried to build a whole system of knowledge. But critics pointed out that this doesn't avoid the trilemma. It just chooses to stop at one assumption and move on. Another response is coherentism. This approach accepts circular reasoning, but tries to make it more stable. Instead of relying on a single base belief, coherentism says that beliefs support each other like a web. A belief is justified if it fits well with the rest of your beliefs. If everything in the web supports everything else, then the system holds together. But even this has problems. If a web of lies is internally consistent, does that make it true? Coherence helps with structure, but it doesn't guarantee that the system matches reality. The third horn of the trilemma is infinite regress. That's the idea that every belief depends on another and another and another with no end. This is the most uncomfortable option because it leaves every belief without a final ground. You never stop justifying. This might seem abstract, but it happens in real life. Take legal systems. One law relies on another, which relies on a principle, which relies on a constitution, which may rely on a theory of justice. You can keep asking why, and there may never be a final answer that doesn't rest on values or assumptions. This kind of infinite chain isn't just hard to grasp, it's impossible to complete. You can't hold an infinite number of beliefs in your head. No one can. So in practice, people stop somewhere. They accept certain ideas as given, either because they seem self-evident or because they're useful. But stopping doesn't solve the trilemma. It just puts it out of sight. Agrippa's trilemma doesn't say that we know nothing. It says that our reasons for believing are always incomplete. You can't build an unshakable foundation. Every belief stands on something else, and sooner or later you hit a loop, a leap of faith, or an endless chain. This isn't just a problem for philosophy. It affects how we think about truth in science, law, politics, and personal life. Think about trust. You might trust a friend because they've always been honest. But why do you think past honesty means future honesty? That's inductive reasoning. It's not certain. You might believe in democracy because you value freedom, but why is freedom good? You might trace it back to dignity, fairness, or human nature. But each of those ideas can be questioned too. Eventually, you reach a belief you can't prove. You believe it because it feels right, or because you grew up with it, or because the alternative seems worse. The trilemma doesn't stop people from acting. We all live with beliefs that rest on shaky ground. We cross streets, take medicine, and tell the truth based on beliefs we can't fully prove. But knowing about the trilemma can change how we think. It can make us less certain, more open to questions, and more aware of the limits of our reasoning. If you keep digging, you'll find that even your belief in logic and reason depends on something. Maybe it's the belief that contradictions are bad. Maybe it's the idea that truth matters. But those too can be challenged. So we're left in a strange position. We want to know things. We want reasons for our beliefs. But every path we take ends in one of three places: a circle, an assumption, or an infinite path we can't walk. That's the trilemma. It doesn't tell you what to believe. It shows you that every belief rests on something you can't quite reach. You think you are a person with a body, a mind, and a clear sense of who you are. You feel located somewhere behind your eyes, looking out at the world. You make decisions. You react. You remember. You feel like the same person today that you were yesterday. But when you look closely at what's going on in the brain, none of that is as solid as it seems. The self-model theory suggests that your sense of being you is not some core essence inside your head. It's a model, a kind of simulation your brain runs to manage your body and help you navigate the world. This model includes the feeling of being located in space. It includes a timeline of memories, a sense of agency, and the experience of owning a body. All these elements get stitched together into one experience. The result is the person you think of as you. But that person isn't sitting in the brain like a driver in a seat. That person is the simulation itself. Your brain is always taking in information. Some of it comes from the outside world, light, sound, touch. Some of it comes from inside, your heartbeat, your stomach, your muscles. Your brain doesn't passively absorb this data. It processes it, predicts what comes next, and updates its internal picture. This internal picture includes a model of the world, but it also includes a model of the body and mind that is observing the world. That internal model of the observer is what you experience as yourself. You don't control the model. You don't build it step by step. Your brain builds it automatically and constantly. When you wake up in the morning, you don't need to remind yourself who you are. The model snaps into place. It gives you the feeling that you are a stable, coherent person. It tells you that you are the one having these thoughts, feeling these emotions, and moving through this day. But all of that comes from processes you don't control. This doesn't mean the self is fake. It means the self is a tool. The brain evolved to survive, not to discover truth for its own sake. A model of the world is useful because it helps you avoid danger, find food, and make sense of other people. A model of yourself is just as useful. It helps you track your body, manage your emotions, make plans, and take responsibility for actions. From the outside, this model looks like brain activity. From the inside, it feels like being you. The theory calls it a self-model because that's what it is, a representation, not the thing itself. It's like a map. A map is not the land it describes. It's a simplified version that helps you get around. In the same way, your brain doesn't need to know every detail about your body and mind. It just needs a version that works well enough to guide behavior. The sense of self is that working version. This raises a strange question. If the self is a model, then who or what is watching it? You might feel like there must be a watcher, some inner witness that looks at the simulation and decides what to do. But when you look for the watcher, you don't find anything. There's no separate you behind the thoughts. There are just the thoughts. No observer behind the feelings, just the feelings. The experience of being a self is part of the simulation. It's not caused by something outside the simulation. This can be hard to accept because it goes against intuition. You feel like you are the one making choices. You feel like there is a core you, a real you, that stays the same through time. But the self-model theory says that feeling is part of the model. It's generated by the brain and updated moment to moment. It feels solid because that's how the system works. A model that feels unreliable wouldn't be much use. Think about how you experience your body. You don't see your arms and legs all the time, but you know they're there. You feel like you inhabit them. You feel like you are inside your skin. But those feelings are generated by the brain. If you lose an arm, you might still feel it for years as a phantom limb. If parts of your brain are damaged, you might stop recognizing one side of your body. In rare cases, people feel like their entire body belongs to someone else. These cases show that body ownership is something the brain can build and something it can lose. The same is true for memory and identity. People with certain types of brain injury may forget who they are, lose their sense of continuity, or feel like different people on different days. This suggests that the sense of a unified self depends on systems in the brain working together. If those systems fail, the self feels broken or unclear. That doesn't mean the self was fake before. It means the self was a construct, one that needs upkeep to stay stable. This doesn't just apply to people with brain injuries. Even in everyday life, the self model shifts. When you're absorbed in music or a game, the sense of self fades. You aren't thinking about yourself. You're just reacting. When you're anxious or depressed, the self can feel heavy, slow, or out of place. These states don't reflect a true self or a broken one. They show how flexible the self model is. You can also see this in how people change over time. The version of you from 5 years ago had different goals, values, habits, and ways of thinking. You might look back and feel like that person was a stranger, but back then, you felt just as real as you do now. The continuity comes from memory and habit. The self-model doesn't need to be exact. It just needs to keep updating in a way that feels smooth. The theory gets more unsettling when you consider how little control you have over the process. You don't choose the contents of your thoughts. You don't design your feelings. You don't even decide to decide. Choices rise up in your mind and you act on them. Later, you might explain your reasons, but those reasons often come after the fact. The brain keeps the model updated and consistent, even when the real process is messy underneath. You might think that makes people less responsible for what they do, but the opposite can be true. If the self is a model built by the brain, then improving it is possible. You can shape your environment, habits, and relationships to change how the model behaves. You can train your attention. You can examine your assumptions. You can question the stories you tell yourself. These actions feed back into the system, updating the model over time. The model can even model itself. When you reflect on who you are, what you want, and how you think, the brain is modeling the model. That's what allows self-awareness. It's a feedback loop that creates the feeling of looking inward. It feels like there's a watcher, but the watcher is just part of the model watching itself. There's no extra you behind the scenes, just layers of representation running in real time. This isn't about reducing people to machines. It's about understanding how the feeling of being a person gets built. The self-model theory doesn't say you're not real. It says your reality is active, dynamic, and shaped by the systems that support it. You don't need a soul floating behind your eyes to be you. You are the process, not a passenger. The dust theory begins with a strange idea. Consciousness is not tied to any particular object or brain. Instead, it emerges from the pattern of matter and energy. What matters is not the material itself, but the arrangement. If a pattern matches the structure of a conscious mind, then that pattern is a mind. This includes the thoughts, sensations, and point of view that come with it. This leads to a bold claim. If the right pattern exists anywhere, in anything, then that pattern is experiencing consciousness. It doesn't matter where it is or what it's made of. It could be made of silicon, neurons, or dust. What matters is how it's arranged. From there, the dust theory takes a step further. It suggests that every possible pattern exists somewhere. In a big enough universe, or a multiverse, there will be regions where matter randomly falls into every possible shape. One of those shapes will match the structure of a human brain at this moment. Another will match it a moment later. String those patterns together, and you have the experience of being you. You might think this is a stretch. Dust in space doesn't think. It floats, it gathers in clouds, it forms stars and planets. But the theory doesn't claim that the dust acts like you. It claims that the pattern matches the state of your mind. If that pattern occurs, then under the theory, that arrangement of matter is having a conscious experience. It doesn't have to respond to input. It doesn't have to do anything. It just needs to be arranged in the right way. This starts to look like solipsism with a twist. You aren't a person in a world. You're a passing pattern in the fabric of reality. You feel like you're living a life. You feel like you're walking, talking, eating breakfast. But really, you are the temporary alignment of matter that matches those experiences. As soon as the pattern stops existing, so does your experience. Now take a step back. If every possible pattern exists somewhere, then every version of every thought exists too. There are versions of you who never learned to read, versions who are sleeping, versions who are watching TV. Each of those versions feels real to itself. Each is convinced that it's having a unique experience. But each is just a pattern, a moment, a flicker. The theory draws on ideas from cosmology and information theory. In a large or infinite universe, random patterns become likely. If you have an infinite amount of space filled with matter moving in different ways, then eventually, by pure chance, some of that matter will line up in ways that resemble brains, computers, or anything else. The odds may be low, but given enough space, low odds are not a barrier. Some physicists refer to this as the Boltzmann Brain problem. A Boltzmann brain is a self-aware entity that arises by chance from random motion in a chaotic system. It might pop into existence, have a single thought, and vanish. The dust theory stretches that idea. It says that any time the right pattern appears, it corresponds to an experience. It doesn't need to last. It doesn't need to evolve. It only needs to occur. That includes you. You feel like you're sitting or standing or lying down. You feel like you've had a life, a past, and plans for the future. But under the dust theory, none of that is guaranteed. You are not the product of a continuous stream of moments. You are the temporary emergence of a structure that happens to hold a certain memory and point of view. There might be no past. There might be no future. There is only this experience. This brings up questions about continuity. If you are one pattern now and another pattern next, is that still you? Or are you just a collection of disconnected snapshots? The dust theory suggests that your sense of continuity is just another part of the pattern. Your memory of a 5-minute conversation is just an imprint in the structure of matter. That memory doesn't prove anything happened. It only proves that a pattern includes the idea that something happened. Some might find this unsettling. If consciousness can arise from anything that has the right form, then what counts as real? If every version of you exists somewhere, does that make your choices meaningless? If you fail, another version of you succeeds. If you die, another version of you goes on. But the dust theory doesn't offer comfort. It doesn't say you will continue. It says there is no you to continue. There is only the appearance of continuity across matching patterns. Think of a flipbook. Each page shows a drawing that's slightly different from the last. Flip the pages fast, and it looks like the image is moving. But each page is still and separate. The motion is an illusion. Under the dust theory, your life is like that. Each moment is a static arrangement. The sense of time, memory, and awareness comes from how that moment is structured. The pages don't know they're in a book. They don't know they're part of a sequence. They just are. A question follows from this. If you are just one pattern among many, what determines which pattern you experience? Why this version of you and not another? The theory doesn't offer a reason. It just says that all patterns exist. Experience attaches to patterns that support it. So the fact that you feel like you exist right now means that some pattern matches your current mind. Nothing more. There is no central observer picking and choosing. There is no self that moves from one pattern to the next. From the outside, this idea is hard to test. You can't point a telescope at a clump of dust and ask if it's thinking. You can't detect consciousness in a random arrangement of particles. There is no physical marker that distinguishes a conscious pattern from an unconscious one. That's part of the point. If consciousness is structure and not behavior or material, then you can't look for it using tools that measure function. This theory also raises ethical questions. If any pattern that matches a conscious state counts as a conscious experience, then what happens when we simulate minds on computers? Are those simulations conscious? Are they creating suffering if the simulated mind is afraid or in pain? If the dust theory holds, then those simulations are as real as you are. Their experience is not pretend. It's actual from their point of view. The dust theory sits at the edge of physics, philosophy, and cognitive science. It's not a scientific theory in the traditional sense. It doesn't make predictions you can test with experiments. Instead, it reshapes how you think about experience and identity. It turns the focus away from brains, bodies, and actions. It turns it toward patterns and the structure of information. This idea may never be proven. It may remain a tool for exploring the limits of what we think of as consciousness, but once you see it, it's hard to forget. You are not who you think you are. You are not even a person in time. You are the momentary structure of matter, arranged in a way that feels like a life. The dust doesn't care what it's doing. It just happens to match a pattern that includes a sense of self. That pattern includes the belief that it has always existed, that it will continue, and that it is real. But that belief is part of the structure too. It doesn't prove anything beyond itself. You enter a room where a machine waits. It's called the Teletransporter. A technician tells you it will scan your body, record every detail of your brain, and create a perfect copy of you on Mars. After the scan, your original body will be destroyed. The copy will wake up on Mars with all your memories and your personality. From the outside, the process looks clean and successful. One person disappears in one place and appears in another. But inside the story, something unsettling happens. The person who steps out on Mars may look like you and act like you, but are they you? Or is the original version gone forever? This is the heart of philosopher Derek Parfit's thought experiment. He used it to examine what it means to survive, what personal identity really is, and whether being the same person over time depends on more than memory and behavior. The machine is just a setup. The deeper question is whether you, the conscious being reading this now, would continue to exist after using the device, or whether you die and a copy of you would continue in your place. The machine in the example works by creating an exact duplicate. It captures every part of your physical makeup, including the fine structure of your brain and nervous system. It doesn't leave out a single detail. The copy has your DNA, your memories, your voice, your posture, and even your sense of humor. It steps out of the booth and carries on your life. It says it's you. It remembers reading the same books, laughing at the same jokes, and worrying about the same problems. If someone asks where you are, this copy raises its hand and says, "I'm right here." Now consider a second version of the story. Suppose the machine breaks down. It scans you and creates the copy on Mars, but fails to destroy your original body. Now there are two of you. One remains on Earth, one lives on Mars. Both claim to be the real you. Both believe they are continuing your life. But now it's clear that personal identity isn't simple. You can't both be the original person. At most, only one could be. Or maybe neither is. Maybe the concept of being the same person over time doesn't survive this kind of scenario. This version of the thought experiment exposes a deep problem. If creating one copy means duplication, and duplication breaks identity, then the original process was never teleportation. It was a form of death. The original person was destroyed, and a copy continued. The story only feels like teleportation because the copy acts like nothing happened. Parfit took this idea seriously. He didn't try to preserve the usual way of thinking about identity. He argued that what matters isn't whether you remain the same person, but whether there is psychological continuity. If someone in the future remembers your life, acts on your intentions, and continues your projects, then survival has occurred in a meaningful way. It may not be personal identity in the strict sense, but it's close enough for many of the things we care about. Still, this view challenges how most people see themselves. If someone tells you they'll destroy your body and replace it with a perfect copy, your natural response may be fear. You may believe you won't wake up in the new body. Instead, a new consciousness will begin, carrying your memories like files transferred to a new computer. You, the one reading this now, may believe you will simply stop. This reaction shows that we often tie identity to the body, or to a continuous stream of consciousness. You fall asleep and wake up, but the sense of being you remains, because no part of the process is broken. With teleportation, there's a break. There's a point where your body is destroyed. Consciousness stops. Then a new version starts up elsewhere. If identity depends on continuity, then the link is broken and you do not survive. Parfit pushed back on the need for continuity. He pointed out that we change constantly. Our cells replace themselves over time, our memories fade or shift, our beliefs evolve, yet we still say we're the same person. If small changes don't break identity, why should a sudden change if the outcome is the same? The copy still remembers loving the same people and learning the same lessons. It still feels pain and joy. It still acts on your hopes and fears. Take another variation. Imagine that instead of creating the copy instantly, the machine replaces one cell at a time. Each cell is replaced with an artificial one, functioning the same way. The process takes weeks, but you stay awake and aware the whole time. In the end, every cell is new, but you still feel like yourself. There was no death, no copy, just slow replacement. Most people would say you survived that, but is gradual replacement so different from sudden replacement? If the end result is the same, a person who looks and behaves like you, then does the speed of the process matter? This is what makes the teletransporter scenario so hard to pin down. It puts pressure on our ideas about continuity, pattern, and selfhood. Now imagine using the machine regularly. Suppose society adopts this technology. People teleport across the globe every day. No one reports anything strange. Life continues. The people who step out of the booths in other cities return to work, see their families, and pay their bills. There's no evidence of harm, but every time a person is destroyed and replaced. If we accept that, we're accepting that survival isn't about keeping the same body or the same consciousness, but about maintaining the right structure and function. That's a hard view to accept emotionally. It treats consciousness like software and identity like a pattern that can be copied. If that's true, then your sense of self is just a result of brain structure. You're not tied to your original body, and your survival doesn't depend on a continuous experience. Instead, what matters is that your pattern continues in a new place. Still, this feels like a loss to many people. It treats the self as something impersonal. It says there's no deep fact about being you, only facts about your memories, behaviors, and structure. That can be unsettling. You might want to believe there's something more. A soul, a core self, something that stays the same no matter what changes around you. Parfit didn't deny that this view is strange. He just argued that it may be true. And if it's true, then the fear of teleportation is based on a misunderstanding. The person who walks out of the booth is enough. The pattern is enough. You don't need to survive in the old sense. What you need is for your thoughts, feelings, and projects to continue. And the copy can do that. But this leads to one last question. Suppose the copy walks out of the booth and your original body was never destroyed. Now there are two of you. Which one gets your relationships? Your home? Your name? Which one is you? If identity is tied to the pattern, then both are. But if identity is a unique thread through time, then neither copy holds it completely. The thread has split, and with it, the self. This is the tension in the Parfit Teletransporter. It exposes how fragile our ideas of identity are. It shows that personal continuity might be a useful fiction, not a deep fact. It doesn't give easy answers, but it makes clear that the question of survival is not about location or appearance. It's about what kind of change the self can survive, and what it means to be you. You wake up and check the time. It's morning. You remember going to sleep last night. You remember what you did yesterday. You have photos on your phone, a calendar full of appointments, and unread emails from earlier in the week. Everything seems in order. But what if none of it is real? What if the entire universe, including you, your memories, your body, your phone, the planet, and the light from distant stars, came into existence just 5 minutes ago? This is the idea behind the 5-minute hypothesis. It suggests that the universe, exactly as it is now, was created 5 minutes ago with every detail in place. That includes all the things that appear to be signs of a past. Your memories were inserted into your brain during creation. The wear on your shoes was built into them. The food in your fridge was made to look aged. Fossils in the ground, history books, video recordings, even the position of the stars in the sky. Everything that seems to prove an older universe was created as part of that setup. None of it actually happened. The question is whether you can prove this idea false. That's where things get tricky. Most of what we call evidence comes from observation or memory. You remember walking to the store yesterday. You see the receipt from the purchase. You might even have a photo of yourself holding the bag. But under this hypothesis, those memories and artifacts were created already in place. The event of you walking to the store never happened. The memory is fake, even though it feels real. The receipt was printed with that timestamp at the moment of creation. You might think the idea is easy to dismiss because it sounds strange, but sounding strange is not the same as being false. The key issue is about falsifiability. That's the ability to show that an idea is wrong using observation or experiment. For example, if someone says water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level, you can test that. You heat the water, measure the temperature, and see what happens. If it boils at 100, the claim holds. If it boils at 80, the claim is false. But if someone says the universe was created 5 minutes ago with all signs of age built in, there is no observation that would show it false. Any test you run could have been part of the initial setup. Any result you get might be a result of how the universe was created, not a reflection of any real past. Even your thoughts about this hypothesis could have been inserted into your brain at the time of creation. Your confusion, your skepticism, even your internal voice right now, all of that could be part of the construct. The idea goes back to a philosopher named Bertrand Russell, who used it to show how difficult it is to pin down knowledge about the past. He didn't argue that the universe really was created 5 minutes ago. Instead, he pointed out that we rely on assumptions when we talk about history or memory. We assume our memories are accurate. We assume physical objects behave consistently over time. But these assumptions can't prove themselves. If the setup of the world includes fake memories and forged signs of age, then nothing you remember can serve as proof. Suppose a friend tells you a story about something they did last week. You listen and believe them. But under this hypothesis, your friend was created 5 minutes ago, with that memory already in their head. The story never happened. You might say that if many people remember the same event, that makes it more likely to be true. But again, the hypothesis allows for all those people to be created with matching memories. In fact, every photo, document, or video could have been inserted into the world with perfect consistency. There's no contradiction to resolve because the setup is complete from the start. The stars in the sky offer another example. Light from distant stars takes millions of years to reach Earth. When we see that light, we say the stars must have existed millions of years ago. But if the light was created mid-flight, as if it had been traveling all along, then the stars didn't need to exist before 5 minutes ago. They only needed to appear as though they had. The illusion is seamless because there is no leftover trace of the setup process. Everything appears consistent. One response is to say the hypothesis doesn't matter if it changes nothing about how the world works. Whether the universe is 5 minutes old or 5 billion years old, gravity still works. You still feel hunger, fire still burns, science still predicts outcomes. But this is a practical stance, not a logical refutation. It says the idea is useless, not that it's false. This leads to the question of why we trust memory or evidence at all. We treat memory as a kind of personal record of events. But it's not perfect. People misremember things all the time. They merge events together, forget details, or fill in gaps without realizing it. If you think of memory as data stored in your brain, the 5-minute hypothesis treats that data as preloaded. You didn't experience those events. They were simply written into your mind. The feeling of remembering is just another part of the illusion. The hypothesis also pushes against the scientific method. Science relies on repeatable experiments and recorded observations. But under this idea, every lab note, every data point, every calculation could be part of the original setup. You might believe you conducted the experiment, but that belief was created along with the result. You didn't perform the test. You were made to think you did. Some people try to reject the hypothesis using logic. They say that if the universe was created 5 minutes ago, it had to come from somewhere. So who created it? How did it get made? But these questions assume the rules of cause and effect apply. The hypothesis allows for the world to appear with cause and effect already in place, even though no real causes occurred. It's like starting a movie 5 minutes in. The characters already have backstories. The plot is already unfolding. You can watch it and assume there was a beginning, but maybe you're just watching a single scene and the rest never happened. Others argue that the hypothesis violates Occam's razor, the idea that the simplest explanation is often best. Saying the universe has a long history is simpler than saying it was created 5 minutes ago with all signs of history faked. But simplicity isn't proof. Occam's razor is a rule of thumb, not a law. It helps guide thinking, but can't eliminate a logically consistent idea. This brings up a deeper issue in philosophy: how we define knowledge. If knowledge requires certainty, the 5-minute hypothesis shows how hard certainty is to reach. If knowledge only requires belief plus evidence, then the quality of that evidence becomes crucial. In this case, the evidence is suspect. It could all be part of the fabrication. Even emotions can't escape. You might feel love for a family member, loyalty to a friend, grief from loss. These feel deeply tied to your experience. But under this hypothesis, those relationships and their histories didn't happen. The feelings are real to you, but the events behind them were never real. That idea can be unsettling because it touches the core of how people see themselves and their place in the world. The 5-minute hypothesis doesn't try to explain how or why such a creation might happen. It only points out that there is no way to rule it out from the inside. If you live in the setup, then everything you use to question it is part of the setup. The past becomes unreachable, not because it's distant, but because it might never have existed at all.